The question of what defines a healer rests on the page, a fundamental inquiry into the nature of the craft. The text continues, describing a healer as one driven by a selfless desire to help others, fueled by love and sacrifice. Leaf ponders these words until the sound of a sliding door interrupts his thoughts. Andy Merlin peers in, asking if he has a moment to spare. This quiet life unfolds in a remote village, a place tucked away at the very edge of the country, where the road simply ends. Outside, the woman expresses her gratitude, apologetic for constantly relying on the young man's skills. As they walk, she mentions her hip is flaring up again, a recurring ailment that comes with age. He listens patiently, offering a sympathetic ear to her troubles. He quickly sets to work in his pharmacy, reassuring her that they are friends and he is happy to help. With intense focus, he begins the process of drug creation, his hands hovering over the medicinal herbs as he prepares a potent painkiller. He hands over the medicine, even including an extra dose for her husband, Arthur, while brushing off her praise with a modest smile. His peaceful moment is shattered by a harsh voice as Dina storms in, calling him trash and demanding he stop dawdling to prepare her dinner. She stands tall, her voice sharp and unforgiving as she looms over the elderly woman. Dina dismisses the excuses about hip pain with a cold sneer, demanding to know if the old woman even understands the concept of service hours. She remains unmoved by the grandmother's humble apologies, snapping that a plea for forgiveness is worthless if the offense is repeated. The grandmother can only bow her head further, her voice trembling as she tries to placate the younger woman's wrath. The tension peaks as she slams her hand onto the surface with a resounding crack, her eyes flashing with accusations. She snarls that the elders are merely exploiting the boy's kind nature to secure favors and free goods for themselves, accusing them of taking advantage of his naivety. In response to her escalating hostility, the young man steps forward, his hands coming together in a sharp clap as he bows deeply. He offers a sincere apology of his own, promising to prepare a special dessert to compensate for the trouble they've caused, his tone earnest and pleading. His unexpected gesture catches her off guard, her haughty expression faltering for a brief moment of confusion. She eventually sighs, relenting and stating that she will let the matter slide for a little while longer, though her gaze remains stern. As she prepares to depart, she casts one final, stern look over her shoulder, emphasizing that her warnings were not to be taken lightly. Her departure leaves a heavy silence in the wake of her sharp words and demanding presence. Moments after she leaves, the boy walks alongside the older woman, their footsteps echoing softly on the path. Merlin shakes her head in disbelief, marveling at how the girl she once knew as Little Doku has transformed into such a fierce and demanding presence. He tries to brush off her concerns with a nervous smile, reminding her that they have been close since they were children. Merlin, however, remains skeptical, questioning how he could possibly be engaged to someone so abrasive and difficult. Despite his outward calm, he gazes downward, his expression hardening with a quiet resolve. He reflects on the hardships she has endured, concluding that he must become someone more reliable to support her through whatever trials she faces. Watching him closely, the grandmother finally speaks, her voice tinged with a deep-seated concern. She asks if he is truly content with the path he is walking, her eyes searching his for any sign of doubt or hidden unhappiness. She looks at him with a mixture of concern and hope, suggesting that if he were to leave this small village and venture into the outside world, his remarkable skills as a healer would surely find the appreciation they deserve. He continues his walk, the sound of his footsteps heavy with the weight of his thoughts as he reflects on the debt he owes his master for taking him in years ago. The idea of leaving feels like a cruel joke, even if staying means wasting away in this rundown place. Standing before the humble pharmacy that has been his home, he reaffirms his resolve, declaring that as his master's pupil, it is his sole duty to protect this place, while his grandmother watches silently from the path. Later that night, the quiet of the pharmacy is broken only by the steady rhythm of his breathing as he drifts into a deep, untroubled sleep. His peaceful slumber is soon interrupted by a looming presence at his bedside, a shadow cast by someone watching him with a cold, calculating gaze. She rouses him with a sharp command, mocking his carefree attitude and calling him a fool for being so oblivious to the world around him. With a triumphant smile, she delivers a crushing blow to his reality, announcing her decision to marry the feudal lord, leaving him speechless and reeling from the sudden betrayal. He stumbles out of bed and into the main hall, his mind racing as he tries to make sense of the commotion echoing through the building. A stern man in formal attire oversees a group of servants as they begin to strip the pharmacy of its contents, prompting a desperate demand for an explanation. He coldly informs the young man that it is already too late, ignoring his protests as the master's precious belongings are hauled away, leaving him powerless to stop the dismantling of his life's work. He stood by as the decree was finalized, the air thick with the weight of a sudden, cruel transition. Lord Onaman, the Baron of Vazrark, stood tall and announced that as of today, the pharmacy and all its contents were now his personal property. He pulled Dina into a tight, possessive embrace, declaring her a woman worthy of his status. She leaned into him with a practiced smile, expressing her feigned delight at the union, while the young apprentice looked on in disbelief. She continued to shower the Baron with praise, her voice dripping with a sweetness that felt like poison to the boy standing in the shadows. Leaf could barely find the words to protest, his world crumbling as the woman he once knew embraced the man who was stripping him of everything. She stood by silently as the Baron explained the cold logic of the seizure. The shop had belonged to Dina's grandfather, and as her new husband, he was the rightful heir. When the boy finally found his voice to shout that the store had always belonged to his master, his words were met with a sharp, dismissive retort. He leaned in, his face twisting into a grotesque sneer of superiority. With a cold, calculating gaze, he commanded the filthy peasant to know his place, asserting that every single item within these walls now belonged solely to him. He watched as the weight of the insult struck the boy like a physical blow, leaving Leaf wide-eyed and breathless. The young apprentice could only stare in stunned silence as the reality of his total loss began to sink in. He watched them walk away, his knuckles whitening as he gripped his own arm in a futile attempt to steady himself. Behind him, the Baron's boisterous laughter echoed through the room, punctuated by Dina's high-pitched, mocking giggles as they left the broken boy behind. They left him there, the sound of their departure followed by the heavy thud of Leaf falling to his knees as his spirit finally broke. He cried out in agony, questioning how they could steal not just the physical tools in the shop, but the very memories of the master he had cherished so deeply. He looked up as she paused for a moment, looking back with a gaze that held no warmth or pity. She reiterated that the pharmacy was her family's legacy, and that a mere orphan picked up from the streets had no claim to anything within its walls. She turned away for the final time, her footsteps clicking sharply on the floor as she delivered one last, crushing blow. She remarked that an unwanted idiot like him would simply rot away without ever being needed, leaving Leaf alone in the hollow remains of his life. He remains motionless as Dina leans in, her voice dripping with a mock kindness that feels like a blade. She offers him the honor of staying on as their servant, a cruel invitation to watch his home be dismantled from the shadows. The young man says nothing, his eyes hidden beneath the dark fringe of his hair as he absorbs the weight of her insult. Suddenly, he stands and turns his back on them, his silence a final, defiant rejection. Dina recoils in disbelief that a mere commoner would spurn her offer, but Onaman merely scoffs, telling her to let the matter rest. He walks down the long, cold corridor of the pharmacy, his footsteps echoing against the walls that once felt like a sanctuary. Behind him, the Lord dismisses him as a worthless nobody, unworthy of even their spite. As he steps out into the open air, the memory of his grandmother's laughter rings in his ears, her voice full of pride as she promised that her lessons would guide him through any hardship. He can almost see her now, back in the warmth of the clinic, her hands busy with herbs as she looked at him with such hope for the man he would become. The weight of his satchel against his hip is a physical reminder of everything he has lost, and for a moment, he can almost feel her hand resting gently on his head. Tears finally break through his stoic mask, streaming down his face as he sobs an apology to the master he feels he has failed. The sun begins to dip behind the trees of the village outskirts, casting long, lonely shadows across the path ahead. He eventually finds a quiet spot among the rocks to sit and think, his mind racing with uncertainty. He cannot go to Merlin, for the sight of his broken spirit would only cause her unnecessary pain. He sits in the shadows of the forest, the weight of his isolation pressing down on him as he realizes he has nowhere left to go and no place to call home. This despair brings back a memory of his grandmother, who once gently suggested that his talents as a healer would find a much greater purpose and appreciation in the world beyond their small village. The thought of the outside world only fuels his anxiety, and he clutches his head in a frantic denial, convinced that a simple boy from the country could never survive the harsh, overwhelming realities of a large city. Still huddled on the forest floor, he spirals into a panic over his lack of funds and the terrifying prospect of becoming a nameless wanderer, bothering others just to survive. His internal turmoil is suddenly interrupted by a sharp, metallic scent on the wind, causing him to pause and sniff the air in confusion as he wonders what could be causing such a smell. Following the smell, he emerges into a clearing to find a gruesome sight. Several armored soldiers lie motionless on the ground, their bodies scattered amidst the trees in the wake of a violent struggle. He approaches the fallen men with a stifled gasp, his eyes widening at the sheer brutality of the scene and the realization that something terrible has occurred here. A sudden rustle in the undergrowth makes him jump, and he turns to see two women emerging from the brush, one of them clutching a wound while the other stands guard, both appearing exhausted and battered. The more elegantly dressed of the two, Priscilla, calls out to him in desperation, pleading for a healer and explaining that their party was decimated by a monster on the road to the village. Without hesitation, he begins to reach for his supplies to help the wounded, though the dark-haired warrior accompanying the noblewoman watches him with sharp skepticism, doubting that a mere child could offer any real assistance in such a dire situation. He holds out a handful of wild plants, prompting a confused query from the onlookers about whether these simple herbs could truly be medicinal. Without a word, he begins to grind the leaves between his palms, the dry stalks snapping with a sharp crunch as he prepares the remedy. Suddenly, a brilliant radiance erupts from his hands, bathing the fallen soldier in a warm glow that leaves the surrounding guards reeling in disbelief. They cry out, questioning if this is some form of high-level magic, as they witness the man's grievous wounds begin to knit together before their very eyes. The young noblewoman stares at him, her eyes wide with wonder at the miracle she'd just witnessed, but he merely offers a humble smile, insisting that it was nothing more than the work of medicine. Her protector, however, remains unconvinced, staring at her own hand as she struggles to comprehend how common herbs could possibly possess such an unimaginable regenerative power. She steps forward aggressively, pointing a finger at him and accusing him of being a deceiver, while the soldiers behind her marvel at the fact that the treatment's effects rival those of a rare full recovery potion. He tries to brush off the praise, claiming the feat wasn't particularly significant. The warrior's frustration boils over as she shouts her refusal to believe such a ludicrous story, adamant that no mere medicine could ever restore a missing limb. She leans in dangerously close, her face flushed with suspicion as she accuses him of plotting some elaborate scheme to entrap them, though he quickly and firmly denies any such intent. A sudden realization seems to strike her, causing her to gasp and fall silent as she considers the impossible truth that only one specific type of healer could ever perform such a feat. While the guard is lost in her thoughts, the lady she protects leans toward the young man, her face full of genuine gratitude as she thanks him for saving them from their desperate situation. She expresses her deep gratitude, moved by his benevolence and willingness to help travelers like them. Moved by his skill, she asks for his name, comparing his watchful presence to that of a deity. The young noblewoman then reveals her identity as Priscilla Fan Graham, daughter of Duke Graham, explaining that rumors of his deeds led her to seek him out. Desperate for his aid, she pleads with him to return to the royal capital, leaving the young man stunned by the sudden request. In her earnestness, she suddenly grasps his hands, causing him to flush crimson as he realizes he has never been in such close contact with a girl before. He quickly tries to manage the misunderstanding, confessing that he isn't the legendary, almighty healer she is searching for. Instead, he suggests she might be thinking of his late master, Asclepius, a revelation that leaves her reeling with shock at the news of the great healer's passing. Despite the confusion, he offers his own assistance, shyly stating that if someone like him will suffice, he is willing to help. Their conversation is abruptly cut short as a pack of massive, snarling wolves emerges from the forest surrounding the group. These towering beasts loom over them, their predatory gaze fixed on the young healer and his companions as the peaceful clearing turns into a battlefield. He stands with his companions as the realization hits. The shadow wolf they encountered before was merely a scout for a much larger pack. The snarling beasts close in from all sides, their predatory eyes fixed on the group. Overwhelmed by the sheer number of monsters, Priscilla sinks to the ground, her strength failing her as the situation turns dire. Seeing her lady collapse, the swordswoman trembles, her grip on her weapon faltering as she calculates their slim chances of survival. She knows they were nearly defeated by just one of these creatures. An entire pack means certain death. Her mind races, desperately searching for a way to ensure the noblewoman's escape, even if it means her own end. Despite the mounting terror, the young healer remains remarkably composed, standing his ground even as two massive wolves loom over him. His calm demeanor baffles the warrior, who screams for him to retreat, insisting that no amount of talent can save a boy from such a savage onslaught. He doesn't move, even as a wolf lunges with bared fangs, its shadow engulfing him. To an observer, it seems like a death sentence for a healer with no combat training, but his mind is focused on a different kind of power. With a sudden, sharp movement, he unleashes a cloud of paralytic poison that instantly drops the lead attackers. The swordswoman watches in disbelief as he explains the true nature of medicine. It isn't just about healing, but about the precise application of substances, regardless of a healer's perceived physical limits. Not stopping there, he prepares a far more potent mixture, his hand glowing with a dark, lethal energy. He turns his gaze toward the fallen noblewoman, asking if she has ever heard of the techniques he is about to employ. The threat is neutralized in a flurry of motion, leaving the guards and the warriors staring in stunned silence at the boy who just saved them. He stands amidst the fallen beasts and formally introduces himself as Leaf, his voice steady and humble despite the incredible feat he just performed. Looking directly at the young woman he rescued, he asks with a hopeful expression if he might accompany her back to the royal capital. Far from the bustling centers of power, in the most remote northern corner of the kingdom, lies a village isolated from the rest of the world. This place, tucked away in the mountains, is known to the few who have heard of it as Dead End. While the village remains a mystery to most, there is a common understanding about its nature that persists throughout the land. This secluded settlement, known to the world as Dead End, is actually a sanctuary for legends. Within its borders dwell individuals of staggering power, a legendary sword deity, a witch of unparalleled skill, and a former hero of great renown. To the outside world, it is a place of no return, but in reality, it is the village of heroes, where the greatest warriors and mages of the past have retired in peace. She stares at him in disbelief as the weight of his origin finally sinks in. The idea that he comes from a place where such titans reside explains his extraordinary, if unconventional, medicinal abilities. He stands before her, looking humble and slightly bashful, while she realizes that anyone emerging from that village is destined to rise to glory and fame, far beyond the reach of ordinary men. Flashback. Leaf slams a declaration of independence onto the table, his voice ringing with defiance as he refuses to follow in the footsteps of his mentor. With a mischievous smirk, the boy stomps away, ignoring the indignant shouts of the old man who had tried to teach him the healing arts. He had even left a parting gift, a mocking note pinned to the master's back, labeling the elder as nothing more than an eccentric and perverted old fool. Back in the present, the young traveler sits within the rattling wooden frame of a carriage, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on the forest path pulling him from his memories. His distant gaze doesn't go unnoticed, as the noble lady seated across from him asks if something is troubling him, sensing his mind is elsewhere. Snapping back to reality, he offers a quick bow and an apology, explaining his lapse in focus while the lady gently inquires about his previous life with his master. However, the stern warrior beside her remains unconvinced, casting a sharp, distrustful glare his way, and questioning the wisdom of bringing an unknown boy into their inner circle. The tense conversation is abruptly cut short by a violent lurch as the carriage hits a massive obstruction, sending everyone tumbling amidst a chorus of startled cries. In the chaotic aftermath of the crash, the warrior finds herself pinned directly atop the boy, their faces inches apart as the noble lady frantically checks for injuries. Overwhelmed by the sudden, intimate proximity, the fierce fighter begins to tremble, her face flushing a deep crimson while the boy stares up in stunned silence. She recoils in a fit of rage, her face flushed with indignation as she demands to know what the boy thinks he is doing. Leaf, cowering slightly, can only offer a frantic apology for the accidental contact caused by the carriage's sudden stop. Her suspicion only deepens, and she declares that her lack of trust was justified all along. Ignoring his attempts to explain that the situation was beyond his control, she brands him a deviant and insists they proceed to the village immediately to expose his true identity. Before the argument can escalate further, Priscilla steps forward with a calm, authoritative air. She places herself between the two, firmly stating that she will vouch for the young healer's character, effectively silencing the warrior's accusations. The tension is suddenly broken by a new arrival, causing Leaf to jump in surprise. He stares wide-eyed at the woman floating effortlessly in the air, calling out to her with familiar shock as he recognizes his aunt. The group stands amidst the wreckage in the quiet forest as the realization of who has joined them begins to settle, prompting a question of identity from the onlookers. Standing tall in her iconic, dark attire, Merlene Carter is recognized as the legendary sage who once stood against the forces of the Demon Lord alongside the Great Brave. Her presence is both imposing and ethereal as she looks down upon the travelers. Overwhelmed with admiration, Priscilla expresses what a profound honor it is to meet such a legendary figure, noting that the display of flight magic is proof enough of her identity. Merlene simply smiles, seemingly amused by the young noble's enthusiasm. Having been corrected by her lady, the warrior finds herself overcome with embarrassment. She stammers out a formal apology to the boy she had just been berating, her face turning a deep shade of crimson as she struggles to maintain her composure. Despite her apology, she leans in close to him, her gaze sharp and warning. She makes it clear that while she may have been wrong about his intent this time, she will not tolerate any further disgraceful behavior from him, leaving Leaf visibly nervous. As the immediate crisis passes, Leaf's thoughts drift back to his mentor. He feels a sense of relief knowing the old man is well, yet he carries a quiet weight of regret, acknowledging to himself that he has failed to become the kind of master his teacher was. He looks up as the woman he calls Auntie speaks softly to him. She acknowledges the hardships he has endured, her voice steady as she warns him that now is not the time to be consumed by self-pity. The elderly woman then extends her hands, offering a neatly folded bundle. She encourages him, insisting that a bright future awaits him despite the shadows of his past. He stares at the gift, his eyes widening in realization as the weight of the moment settles over him. Unfolding the fabric, he recognizes the garment immediately. It is the very robe his master once wore, a symbol of a legacy he is now meant to carry. While he stands in silence, Priscilla and Lilith watch from a short distance, their expressions a mix of curiosity and quiet respect for the transition taking place. His mind drifts back to the years spent under his master's tutelage, remembering how the old man had taken him in and raised him alongside Daquona in that cluttered, medicine-filled workshop. He recalls his younger self wandering through aisles of ancient texts, admitting that he once found the path of a healer to be unremarkable, only to find himself captivated by the dedication his master showed to the craft. Returning to the present, the woman explains that while the master intended for him to receive this robe only after achieving greatness, his current circumstances demand its protection and prestige now. As he turns the robe over, he finds a familiar, blunt message scrawled across the back in his master's hand, calling him a snotty brat in a final, characteristic jab. The sight of those words causes his breath to hitch, his eyes shimmering with a mixture of nostalgia and a renewed sense of purpose. He wipes away tears, his voice thick with emotion as he offers a final word of gratitude to the woman who cared for him. Looking out at the small group gathered by the carriage, he realizes that while he felt he had lost everything, new bonds have already begun to form. Clutching the master's robe to his chest, he confesses his long-held dream of becoming an adventurer, even as the elderly woman warns him of the trouble he might inadvertently cause. His eyes light up with a newfound fire as he declares his intent to follow in his mentor's footsteps, traveling the world to hone his skills as a healer. The caretaker presents him with a sturdy wooden chest, a final parting gift to aid him on his journey, and urges him to live his life with true freedom. When she offers him a pouch of savings for emergencies, he politely declines, insisting with a determined smile that he will earn his own way forward. He waves a final farewell as the distance between them grows, hearing her call out one last time for him to focus on his own path, rather than worrying about those left behind. However, a sudden shift in her tone catches him off guard. Her expression hardens into something far more intense as she mutters a cryptic promise to take care of matters in his absence. Shaking off the momentary confusion, he finally dons the oversized robe, the fabric billowing around him as the group prepares to leave the safety of the forest. With the weight of his master's legacy on his shoulders and his companions by his side, he looks toward the horizon, ready for the adventure that is finally beginning. He and his companions are suddenly halted as a colossal, winged beast slams onto the road before their carriage. The sheer scale of the creature is overwhelming, its scales dark and its presence suffocating. One of the guards shouts in alarm, mistakenly identifying the monstrosity as merely a giant lizard. Because of this sudden appearance, Lilith and Priscilla stare in disbelief, their previous confidence vanishing. They quickly realize that the lizards roaming outside the village were nothing compared to this. An actual dragon has descended upon them. The beast itself lets out a mocking, booming laugh that rattles their very bones. In response to their shock, the creature speaks with a voice like grinding stones, calling them foolish humans for insulting its lineage by calling it a mere lizard. Lilith is paralyzed by the realization that the creature can speak the human tongue, a trait of an ancient, mythical class monster. When Leaf steps forward and calmly identifies himself as a healer, the dragon's gaze narrows with predatory interest. Moments later, the beast draws in a deep breath, its throat glowing with the heat of impending destruction. It declares that they will be met with flames and burned to cinders. Priscilla and Lena cling to each other in terror, while Lilith finds herself reflecting on the brevity of her life as the end draws near. As the threat of incineration looms, the young healer acts with startling speed, his hands glowing as he invokes his unique craft. He rapidly synthesizes a muscle-strengthening agent, the air crackling with the intensity of his drug creation. With a powerful stomp that shatters the earth beneath him, he prepares to launch himself at the beast. With a roar of determination, he lunges into the air, his fist connecting with the dragon's jaw in a blow of impossible strength. Lilith can only watch in stunned silence as the boy she thought was a mere trainee takes flight. He shouts his vow to protect everyone, his resolve as firm as the strike he just delivered. The impact is so great that the massive creature is flipped onto its back, defeated in a single, absurdly powerful strike. A strange, chime-like sound echoes through the clearing as the dragon lies motionless, its belly exposed. Lilith and Priscilla stand frozen, unable to process the sight of a mythical monster being felled by a healer's punch. After the dust settles, the boy turns back to them with a bright, innocent smile. Seemingly unaware of the impossibility of his feat, he adjusts his clothing, thinking to himself that wearing his master's robe truly makes him feel like a proper, professional healer. Meanwhile, Lilith stares at him, her face pale and beads of sweat rolling down her forehead. She is at a complete loss for words, her mind reeling from the disconnect between his gentle demeanor and the raw, violent power he just displayed. Finally, her shock boils over into a frustrated scream that echoes through the forest. She bellows that she absolutely refuses to call someone with that kind of terrifying strength a healer, leaving the proper healer standing in the wake of her outburst. She and the others are now traveling in a horse-drawn carriage, the wooden wheels clattering loudly against the uneven dirt road. From within the rattling vehicle, the young healer breaks the silence, inquiring about the specific nature of the assistance they require from him. He listens as the noblewoman explains that their need for a healer of his caliber stems from a singular, vital reason. She remains vague for the moment, promising to divulge the full details of the situation once they have safely reached the privacy of her family's estate. She leans forward, her expression turning solemn as she clarifies their request. Her primary goal is for him to utilize his vast medical knowledge to conduct a thorough examination of a specific individual whose condition clearly weighs heavily on her mind. The bustling streets of the royal capital are alive with the hum of activity, as merchants and citizens of all kinds, including many with animal-like features, go about their daily lives. Walking through the crowd, the young trainee can hardly contain his awe, his eyes darting from one marvel to the next as he takes in the sheer scale of the city. Towering above the narrow, winding streets, the majestic white spires of the royal castle pierce the sky, a testament to the power and history of the realm. He marvels at how closely the buildings are packed together, noting that back home, even a simple trip to a neighbor's house was a significant journey, while his companion watches his excitement with a mix of amusement and disbelief. She quickly warns him to lower his voice and maintain his composure, fearing that his exuberant outbursts will draw unwanted attention from the passing crowds. As they navigate the busy thoroughfare, she reminds him that they are on their way to meet Lord Cypher, the Duke and father of the young lady they have been escorting. He begins to form a mental image of the Duke, imagining a man as gentle and kind-hearted as his daughter, hoping that his arrival won't cause any undue trouble for the noble family. Their journey brings them to the imposing entrance of the Duke's residence, where a line of armored guards stands in silent, disciplined formation, signaling their arrival at the seat of power. Inside the grand hall, the reality of the Duke's presence is far more intimidating than imagined. Lord Cypher sits upon his seat, a mountain of a man with a stern gaze and a powerful physique that commands immediate respect. The sight of the formidable noble sends a jolt of pure terror through the boy, his previous expectations shattered as he lets out a silent cry of shock. He stands trembling in the grand hallway, his body racked with visible tremors as the weight of the situation settles in. Nearby, Priscilla bows her head, pleading for her father's forgiveness for her sudden departure from the capital. The young trainee's eyes widen in sheer terror as the realization hits him. He is standing before the Duke, the most influential man in the land after the royal family itself. This overwhelming presence triggers a bitter memory of a sneering noble who once spat insults at him, calling him a filthy peasant and reminding him of the vast gulf between their social stations. Haunted by these past humiliations, he lowers his gaze, convinced that despite Priscilla's kind words, he is destined to suffer the same harsh treatment once again. Across the ornate hall, the Duke's stern gaze fixes upon the boy, acknowledging that his daughter's journey may have actually yielded a significant result. As the boy begins to stammer out a word of thanks, the Duke turns fully toward him, confirming that the rumors regarding a healer named Leaf were indeed true. Then, in a move that defies all social order, the massive nobleman suddenly drops to his knees, bowing his head low and desperately begging the stunned boy to lend them his wisdom. The echoes of this shocking request ring through the high-vaulted ceilings of the residence, leaving the young man breathless and confused by the Duke's sudden humility. A moment of quiet follows as a delicate porcelain cup of steaming tea is placed gently on a table, the clink of the saucer grounding the surreal atmosphere. Now seated in a more private chamber, he is served a rare blend reserved only for the ducal household, while Priscilla prepares him to meet the patient he has been summoned to examine. He listened as she clarified that her concern was for her mother, her voice soft but steady as she began to explain the situation. She spoke of a woman who was once the embodiment of vitality, one of the most exceptional magicians in the capital who had never known the touch of illness. She explained that this strength vanished a month ago when her mother suddenly collapsed, and since that day, her condition has only spiraled downward despite every effort to save her. Her hands tightened against her gown as she confessed that her mother now does nothing but sleep, trapped in an unending slumber. She watched as he listened intently before asking for the name of the affliction and whether any other physicians had attempted a diagnosis. He saw her turn back to him with a look of profound helplessness, admitting that the name of the sickness is unknown, even after the head healer thoroughly examined the Duke's wife. She stood by as the Duke explained that while stress was the suspected trigger, the supervision of the healers has done nothing to stop her condition from worsening, leaving the boy to process the grim reality. He felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on him, his mind racing as he questioned his own ability to succeed where so many others had failed. His fist clenched at his side as he grappled with the impossibility of the task. If the royal doctors were baffled, what hope did a mere trainee have of uncovering the truth? He saw them both look to him with desperate eyes, and she finally voiced the plea that hung heavy in the air, begging him to help her mother. He stares in stunned silence as the young noblewoman before him breaks down, her voice trembling as she begs him to save her mother. Behind her, the Duke stands tall but echoes her desperation, his usual composure cracked by the weight of their family's plight. Before he can even process the request, she drops into a deep, formal bow, her forehead nearly touching the floor as she implores him for aid. The sudden display of humility from someone of her status leaves him flustered, his hands waving frantically as he begs her to stand. The situation grows even more surreal when the Duke himself follows suit, bowing his head in a silent, heavy plea for his wife's life. The room is thick with the raw emotion of a family pushed to the brink, their titles forgotten in the face of impending loss. The young trainee looks away for a moment, the gravity of their trust settling onto his shoulders like a physical weight. He is just a student, yet here are the most powerful people he has ever met, placing all their hope in his hands. A quiet realization dawns on him as he observes them. Despite their noble blood and high standing, their love for one another is simple and profound. They aren't just lords and ladies. They are a family terrified of losing their heart. With a sudden burst of resolve, he stands tall and strikes his chest, his eyes burning with a newfound purpose. He declares with absolute certainty that he will give everything he has to ensure Diane's recovery, his voice ringing with the conviction of his training. His declaration brings an immediate, overwhelming reaction from the young lady, who lunges forward with tears of joy, her proximity catching him completely off guard. She pours out her gratitude, her relief so palpable it leaves him stammering and red-faced. The nobleman, not to be outdone, leans in close as well, his massive frame looming over the boy as he offers his own intense thanks. The sheer pressure of their combined gratitude is almost as daunting as the medical task ahead, leaving him reeling from the sudden shift in energy. Sensing the need for action, the Duke quickly regains his bearing and summons a nearby attendant, commanding that the young healer be taken to his wife's chambers immediately. He follows the guide, his mind already shifting from the emotional outburst to the clinical challenge that awaits. As he takes his first step toward the patient's room, his expression hardens into one of grim determination. In his heart, he makes a silent, sacred vow to succeed, staking his very identity and the honor of his master on the outcome of the coming hours. He stands before the massive doors of the sick room, his resolve hardening as he declares his unwavering commitment to saving the lady within, regardless of the cost. Reaching for the handle, a wave of apprehension washes over him, causing a sharp intake of breath as the weight of the task ahead truly begins to settle. Before he can enter, a sharp command rings out, halting them in their tracks as a flamboyant figure emerges from a flurry of petals, much to the young lady's shock. The newcomer strikes a dramatic pose, his arrival punctuated by an air of self-importance that leaves the young healer questioning the identity of this sudden interloper. The mystery is quickly solved when the noblewoman identifies the man as Sir Bacchus, the esteemed royal court doctor, a revelation that leaves the trainee healer reeling in disbelief. The doctor erupts into a boisterous, self-assured laugh, his presence filling the hallway and momentarily overshadowing the boy standing quietly before him. Acknowledging the Duke's presence, the physician explains that he had been briefed on the patient's deteriorating condition and had cleared his demanding schedule to intervene personally. With a theatrical flourish, he boasts of his status as the youngest royal doctor in history, confidently asserting that his specialized expertise is the only solution they need. As the Duke ushers the prestigious doctor into the room, the young lady offers a hurried, apologetic glance back at the boy who had been their only hope moments before. Left standing alone in the corridor, he can only stare in stunned silence, wondering if his presence and his promise have already been forgotten in the wake of the royal expert's arrival. He sat alone, shoulders slumped under the weight of self-doubt. The realization that a simple healer from the countryside might be out of his depth compared to the legendary practitioners of the capital gnawed at him, leaving him in a state of quiet dejection. His brooding was interrupted by the sharp voice of the royal doctor, who demanded to know why he was spacing out. With a surprising gesture of inclusion, the man granted him permission to observe his work, an offer that left the young trainee stammering in disbelief at such unexpected kindness. As they approached the heavy doors, the doctor issued a stern warning for him to stay out of the way. The hinges groaned as they entered the private chambers, the air inside thick with the scent of medicinal herbs and the heavy silence of a sick room. Inside the grand bedroom, the light was dimmed, casting long shadows across the ornate furniture. The patient lay motionless beneath a mountain of white linens, surrounded by anxious attendants and the heavy presence of her family, who watched the doctor's arrival with desperate hope. She remained pale and unresponsive, her breathing shallow as her daughter anxiously inquired about her condition. Standing just behind the royal physician, the young healer swallowed hard, feeling the immense pressure of the situation as the gravity of the lady's illness became clear. The Duke stepped forward, his voice strained as he admitted that the situation had spiraled beyond their control. He expressed his profound relief at the doctor's arrival, placing the full weight of his wife's survival onto the newcomer's shoulders. Without a word, the physician began his examination, his eyes narrowing as he scrutinized the medical records. The room held its collective breath, the only sound being the soft rustle of parchment as he searched for the cause of the lady's decline. A sharp intake of breath followed as he claimed to have identified the affliction. The Duke's eyes widened in a mix of shock and anticipation, marveling at the speed with which the royal doctor had reached a conclusion that had eluded everyone else. He gripped the medical report tightly, the paper crinkling under his fingers as he prepared to deliver his verdict. He called for the Duke's full attention, his expression hardening as he prepared to name the shadow that had fallen over the household. The finality in his voice was chilling as he pronounced the name of the ailment, the manhua disease. The room plunged into a cold despair as he delivered the devastating blow, declaring that the condition was, by all known means, incurable. He details the horrific progression of the disease, explaining how it systematically shuts down the lungs and heart. With a grim finality, he declares the mortality rate to be absolute, admitting that modern medicine is powerless to even delay the inevitable, much to the Duke's horror. He continues his explanation, recounting legends of a lost antidote. These vital ingredients supposedly vanished from the face of the earth during the ancient conflict between the great hero and the demon lord, leaving the recipe a mere myth that he has never witnessed in his lifetime. The weight of the diagnosis crushes Priscilla, causing her to tremble and stagger back in grief. Her father and the attendants rush toward her as she whispers in denial, unable to accept the death sentence handed to her mother. She stares blankly at the bed, her voice trembling as she asks if her mother is truly destined to die. Behind her, the medical team stands in somber silence, their professional detachment offering no comfort to the grieving daughter. Breaking the heavy silence, the young trainee steps forward and boldly contradicts the royal physician. He calmly asserts that the manhua disease is not the death sentence they believe it to be, but is instead entirely curable. His words hang in the air, leaving the room in a stunned, breathless silence. The doctors can only stare at the boy, paralyzed by the sheer audacity of his claim. The silence breaks as the royal doctor slams his hand down in a fit of rage, shouting that the boy's words are a lie. He insists that without the legendary antidote, there is no hope, and he demands that the meddling brats stay out of professional matters. Undeterred by the outburst, he simply smiles and reveals that he happens to have the very ingredients the doctor claimed were extinct. The revelation sends the physician into a state of pure, wide-eyed shock, his composure completely shattering. He snatches the specimen, his eyes darting over the vibrant, glossy leaves as he inhales its unmistakable, pungent scent. Though he finds it preposterous that such a rarity was found growing behind a commoner's house in the mountains, he is forced to admit that this is indeed the genuine Shinjiko. Having proven he possesses the cure, he then delivers an even more shocking revelation. He looks the stunned crowd in the eye and explains that, in his estimation, Lady Diane isn't actually suffering from the manhua disease at all. He stands calmly while the court doctor collapses in sheer disbelief at his bold claim. As the doctor scrambles back to his feet, he demands an explanation, insisting that the rapid progression of the illness makes no sense and accusing the boy of playing games with a serious matter. The specialist turns his attention back to his records, noting that the patient collapsed only a month ago, which would be an unusually fast timeline for the suspected disease. He finds himself questioning how a mere trainee could even be familiar with such specific medical details. When the young healer asks to review the medical report, the doctor finds himself handing it over with a nervous fidget, his mind racing as he tries to fathom the true identity of the person standing before him. Watching the boy scan the pages, the doctor realizes this is no ordinary apprentice, as the lad possesses a level of insight and a grasp of the situation that far exceeds his years, not to mention the possession of a legendary herb. Despite his growing respect, the court physician remains defensive, clutching his pride and asserting that his own physical examination of the patient cannot be wrong. He strikes a confident pose, reasserting his status as a specialist in the field of rare diseases and doubling down on his initial diagnosis. The boy looks up from the documents with a steady gaze, calmly suggesting a possibility that hadn't even been considered, that the affliction might not be a biological sickness at all. This revelation leaves the doctor speechless, his eyes widening as the weight of the suggestion begins to sink in. Ignoring the man's shock, the young healer produces a glowing reagent and prepares to take a blood sample from the unconscious noblewoman. undeterred by the doctor's startled protests. He watches as the reagent reacts, confirming his suspicion that the mistress is not suffering from a natural illness, but rather the effects of a cursed toxin that has been misidentified by the court. This revelation leaves the court doctor reeling, as he struggles to reconcile the boy's claim with the history of demonic warfare and the long-lost poisons that were thought to have vanished from the world years ago. The young healer continues his explanation, noting that while the symptoms mimic the Amanshur disease, this toxin specifically targets and drains the victim's mana, which explains why a powerful mage like Diane succumbed so quickly. Overwhelmed by the depth of this insight, the older man begins to stammer an apology for his earlier arrogance, leaving the boy visibly startled by the sudden and dramatic shift in his demeanor. He suddenly lunges forward and grips the boy's shoulders, his eyes wide with genuine admiration as he declares the youth to be a truly remarkable talent. The praise from such a high-ranking official sends the trainee into a flustered panic, while the doctor leans in closer, desperate to know how a mere child could possess such vast and specialized knowledge. After a moment of intense scrutiny, the doctor's expression softens into one of desperate hope as he asks the only question that matters: whether the boy can actually save her life. He confirms that a cure is possible, though he warns that the process of undoing such a complex curse will be a meticulous and time-consuming endeavor that requires absolute precision. The doctor falls into a somber silence, realizing that his own medicinal stores and herbs may be insufficient to combat the toxin given how far it has already progressed within her body. As the gravity of the situation settles over them, a memory of the legendary sage Merlin flashes through the boy's mind, leading him to realize that the parting gift she gave him is the exact key needed for the treatment. He held the gnarled, bulbous root aloft with a triumphant flourish, his eyes shining with newfound certainty. With a firm voice that echoed through the room, he declared his intent to save Lady Diane, presenting the strange gift from Merlin as the definitive key to her recovery. Leaf stands confidently before the sickbed, declaring his intent to cure Diane with his unique tool. Bacchus, the court doctor, scoffs at the sight of the staff, which looks more like a crude, stone-bound club than a medical instrument. Unfazed by the mockery, the young healer prepares himself, telling the skeptic to simply watch and learn. He raises the massive, heavy club high above his head with both hands. With a determined shout of "Here I go," he swings the blunt object down toward the ailing woman, calling out the administration of his cure as if it were a martial strike. The impact releases a blinding, explosive burst of light as the divine healing staff connects with its target. The onlookers are frozen in absolute shock, their faces illuminated by the sudden, violent display of restorative power that defies all conventional medical logic. As the brilliance fades, she lies peacefully in her bed, the deathly, gray pallor of her skin replaced by a warm, healthy glow. Priscilla watches in breathless wonder, whispering to her mother as she witnesses the impossible recovery happening before her eyes. He begins to explain the fundamental principles of medicine to the stunned room, noting that even the best remedies fail if they aren't administered with the correct dosage and in the precise location. His method, however unorthodox, addresses these requirements directly. The young healer continues his lecture, detailing how the staff ensures perfect administration with a single swing. Once charged with medicine, the artifact maintains the potency and value of the treatment indefinitely, delivering it with absolute efficiency. Suddenly, the court doctor lunges forward and grabs him by the shoulders, his skepticism replaced by a desperate, greedy curiosity. Bacchus demands to know how a mere boy came into possession of such an astonishing and powerful item, his professional pride completely shattered. Amidst the shouting, the woman in the bed finally stirs, her eyes fluttering open as she softly calls out for Priscilla. The room falls silent as the miracle is confirmed by her waking voice. She sits up slowly, looking around the room with a dazed expression, wondering what has happened to her. Her husband, Duke Cypher, can only stare at her in tearful, silent relief, his heart overflowing at the sight of his wife returned to health. Overcome with emotion, the young noblewoman throws herself into her mother's arms, weeping with pure joy and gratitude. The boy stands back, watching the family's tearful reunion with a quiet sense of satisfaction, his work here finally done. She stands with her father by the bedside, watching the quiet scene as the tension finally breaks and the weight of the crisis lifts from the room. The woman in the bed breathes steadily now, her face serene as she drifts into a deep, restorative sleep, her body finally at peace. Seeing this recovery, the Duke turns to the young healer and bows deeply, expressing his profound gratitude for saving his wife. He notes that while she is out of danger, she will need time to regain her strength and mana under careful watch, acknowledging the long road of recovery ahead. His daughter, eyes sparkling with relief, suggests they hold a grand banquet to honor the boy's incredible efforts. Though the young man tries to wave off the praise with a humble refusal, the Duke is already won over by the idea, eager to celebrate the miracle. The boy remains modest, insisting he only did what any healer would, but his humility only deepens the admiration of those around him. The household staff and the young lady herself are moved to tears, hailing him as a saint and insisting he remain as their honored guest for the night to receive a proper reward. As the others bustle about, she gazes at him, her heart racing with a new, fluttering intensity she cannot quite name. Later that evening, the quiet of the manor is shattered by the heavy thud of a glass hitting wood as a voice bellows the young healer's name. The court doctor, now several drinks into the night, leans heavily toward his companion, admitting his shock that a mere boy could identify such a rare and cursed toxin. He demands a moment to unwind, his professional pride clearly shaken by the day's events. He continues his boisterous display, declaring that since this is the first true professional defeat he has ever suffered, a grand celebration is the only appropriate response to such a monumental loss. Despite the alcohol, a shadow of professional curiosity remains in his eyes as he confesses that one thing still haunts him: the sight of the monstrous power the boy unleashed to save the Duchess. He stares at the young man, wondering what other secrets he might be hiding. He leans in, his voice hushed as he questions how Lady Diane could have possibly come into contact with such a rare toxin in the first place. The young healer pauses, a sharp realization flashing in his eyes as he considers the implications of the court doctor's inquiry. The boy leans closer, requesting that the doctor keep what he is about to say a strict secret, to which the older man readily agrees. He begins to recount a grim tale from a distant land, asking if the doctor has ever heard of a murder committed using nothing more than simple eye drops. The doctor listens intently as the youth describes a case where a wife slowly poisoned her husband by adding eye drops to his drinks over several days, masking his death as mere emaciation. This method, the boy explains, mirrors the effects of the cursed toxin, which narrows the human body's blood vessels to lethal effect when administered in high doses. The realization hits the court doctor like a physical blow, as he understands that someone must have intentionally mixed the poison into the lady's drinks, a fact the young healer grimly confirms. Standing abruptly, the young man declares with heavy certainty that the culprit responsible for poisoning Lady Diane is almost certainly someone within her inner circle. Silence falls over the grand, empty hallways of the estate, the weight of the accusation hanging in the air. In the quiet of the sick room, the lady remains in a deep, restorative sleep, unaware of the shadow looming over her bedside. Her daughter sits faithfully by her side, softly asking if she remembers the old legends of the almighty healer they used to share when she was but a child. She sits at her mother's bedside, the weight of recent events finally lifting. The rumors of the legendary healer were indeed true, and though the master has passed, his legacy lives on through his young disciple. Looking down at the resting woman, she marvels at how that very disciple managed to succeed where so many others failed. Her voice is filled with admiration as she asks her mother if the boy isn't truly remarkable. A soft blush creeps onto her cheeks as she continues, her fingers fidgeting nervously with her dress. It wasn't just his skill that impressed her. He was also unexpectedly kind and, in her eyes, quite handsome. Suddenly, she gasps, her face turning a deep crimson as the weight of her own words sinks in. Before she can dwell on her embarrassment, a voice from the shadows of the doorway interrupts, asking if she feels lonely in the quiet room. The intruder is Rudak, who stands poised at the entrance. She quickly composes herself, explaining her desire for a private moment with her mother, while informing him that Lilith is currently away on another matter. Upon hearing that they are unguarded, a dark, predatory smirk spreads across his face. To him, the absence of the household's strongest protector is a stroke of incredible luck. He looms over the bed, his shadow stretching across the two defenseless women. This is the opportunity he has been waiting for, the perfect moment to finish the grim task he began and ensure his secrets remain buried forever. Priscilla stares at the man she once trusted, her voice trembling as she asks for an explanation for his cryptic words. She watches as the servant stands with his head bowed, his silence heavy before he finally mutters that the entire charade has become an exhausting chore. He is suddenly enveloped in a violent maelstrom of dark energy, his body contorting as he repeats his disdain for the role he has been forced to play. This monstrous form towers over the room, a horned demon who laments how close he was to finally ending Diane's life, leaving the young noblewoman paralyzed with horror. He discards all pretenses, explaining that his elaborate plan to seize the crown was only thwarted because a certain meddling trainee managed to identify his secret toxin. He looms closer while the young noblewoman watches in shock, sneering that she should abandon any hope of rescue from the boy who supposedly saw through his scheme. He continues his cruel taunts, claiming that the young healer has already fallen victim to a lethal dose of poison and is likely dead by now, his face twisting into a malicious smirk. He mocks the sentimentality of her bond, but she refuses to back down, stepping protectively in front of her mother's bed and vowing that she will never allow him to strike the final blow. She closes her eyes and desperately calls out for the one person she still believes in as the beast lunges forward with a murderous roar, intent on ending them both. His path is suddenly intercepted by a thunderous explosion as a familiar figure crashes into the room with overwhelming force. He stands tall, his sudden appearance drawing a gasp of disbelief from Priscilla. Across from him, the demonic Rudak snarls, his surprise quickly turning to a low, guttural growl as he realizes his prey has returned from the brink. Because of this unexpected survival, the demon demands to know how he is still standing, insisting that he witnessed the boy consume the lethal toxin with his own eyes. In his mind, the memory of the youth casually sipping from the cup remains vivid and undeniable. The young healer merely tilts his head in genuine confusion, admitting that he hadn't even noticed anything unusual about the drink. This nonchalant response only serves to further agitate the demon, whose face contorts in a mixture of rage and disbelief. He offers a sheepish apology, scratching the back of his head as he explains that poisons and toxins simply have no effect on his body. The revelation leaves his adversary sweating and flustered, unable to comprehend such a biological anomaly. In a fit of desperate rage, the demon lunges forward, his massive fist aimed directly at the boy's face. The air explodes with a relentless barrage of strikes as the creature pours all his demonic strength into a flurry of blows. Panting heavily and drenched in sweat, The attacker finally relents, only to find his target standing perfectly still and entirely unscathed. He stares in horror as the boy begins to explain the secret behind his resilience, his voice calm and clinical. The explanation continues, revealing that his body is undergoing a process of instantaneous regeneration, mending every tear and bruise the moment they occur. He concludes by clarifying that he has pushed his natural healing factor to its absolute limit using a specialized stimulant, effectively making him an unstoppable force of recovery. He tightens his grip on the demon's arm, his expression cold and clinical. He explains that this is the proper way to utilize a toxin, leaving his opponent trembling in sheer disbelief at the boy's sudden dominance. The effect is instantaneous as the neurotoxin takes hold, causing the once imposing figure to slump to the ground in a heap of paralyzed muscle. Desperation replaces his former arrogance, and he begins to plead for mercy, promising to retreat back to his own realm if only his life is spared. Standing over the pathetic, shivering form, the young healer muses on the intersection of medicine and the lunar cycle, suggesting that the full moon's influence on blood flow might be responsible for such erratic behavior. He looks up at the night sky with a calm, almost detached air, asking the demon if he finds the moon as beautiful as he does. Without warning, he unleashes a devastating detoxing massage, a flurry of strikes that shatters the very stone beneath them. The sheer force of the technique creates a localized earthquake, pulverizing the courtyard in a display of overwhelming physical power. As the dust settles, the demonic energy is forcibly purged, leaving the creature in a state of unexpected euphoria. Now reduced to a small, harmless shadow of his former self, the spirit offers a sincere apology and begs for permission to depart, which the boy grants on the condition that he abandons his wicked ways. With a final, high-pitched farewell, the tiny entity streaks across the moonlit sky, disappearing into the distance. The healer watches the departure in silence, the immediate threat finally neutralized. Moments later, the sound of hurried footsteps echoes through the ruined garden as the noblewoman arrives, breathless and wide-eyed. She stares in shock at the cratered landscape, her chest heaving from the exertion of her search. He turns to meet her gaze, offering a sheepish apology for the collateral damage caused during the struggle. She remains frozen for a heartbeat, her eyes welling with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Overwhelmed by the realization that the danger has passed, she lunges forward, throwing her arms around him in a desperate, crushing embrace. The impact of her gratitude is almost as forceful as the battle that preceded it. She buries her face against him, sobbing out her thanks for saving them once again. Caught off guard by the sudden display of affection, the boy can only stammer and sweat, his clinical composure completely evaporating in the face of her raw emotion. She continues to cling to him, her voice trembling with a mix of desperation and resolve as she insists that her debt must be properly repaid, or she will never find peace. The young healer, caught in her intense grip, can only stare in wide-eyed shock at the sudden weight of her gratitude. Demanding an acknowledgement, she leans in close, her eyes burning with a fierce intensity that leaves him dizzy and reeling. Overwhelmed by her sudden proximity and the raw emotion in her voice, he finally relents, pleading for her to give him some space as the full moon hangs high in the night sky above them, witnessing the strange exchange. The scene shifts to the quiet interior of the estate, where a stone lion fountain steadily pours a stream of water into a basin, the rhythmic sound echoing through the empty halls. Within the steam-filled sanctuary of the bathhouse, the boy sits alone on a small stool, the warmth of the room a sharp contrast to the chaotic events of the evening. He remains still, lost in thought as the water continues to flow nearby, trying to process the intensity of the noblewoman's vow. Suddenly, a sound from the entrance breaks his concentration, causing him to snap his head around in confusion. His eyes widen as he realizes he might not be as alone as he thought, a sense of impending surprise washing over him as someone approaches the steaming water. The sound of splashing water precedes a soft voice offering an apology for the delay. He recoils in sheer disbelief as she kneels before him in the steaming water, calmly proposing to wash his back. His heart hammers against his ribs with a frantic rhythm while she tries to downplay the situation, insisting it is merely a matter of courtesy. He, however, is paralyzed by the absurdity of the moment, wondering how his day could have possibly led to this. She leans closer, her gaze soft and inviting, urging him to simply relax and let go of his tension. He finds this level of hospitality entirely foreign, a luxury he has never known, and the sheer intensity of the gesture leaves him trembling and overwhelmed. Sensing his hesitation, she looks up with a blush deepening on her cheeks, explaining that she simply wanted to show her appreciation. She admits to gathering her courage for this invitation and asks, with a hint of worry, if her presence is causing him distress. He quickly stammers a denial, his eyes darting away as he assures her that he doesn't mind the gesture in the slightest, even as his pulse continues to race. A heavy silence falls between them as she moves even closer, the scent of the bathwater and the warmth of the room magnifying the intimacy of the moment. She then speaks softly, her voice filled with genuine emotion as she thanks him once more for coming to her rescue earlier that day. With a final, tender look, she encourages him to take his time and find the rest he so clearly needs. She stands up suddenly, her towel barely clinging to her form as she confronts him. Leaf lets out a deafening cry of shock, his face contorted in pure panic as he tries to process the sudden, overwhelming sight in the humid air of the bath. Her heart races, the rhythmic thumping audible in the quiet of the room as a deep crimson flush creeps up her neck. He is equally paralyzed, his own heart hammering against his ribs as he stammers, unable to find any words to break the heavy, expectant silence. She suddenly cries out that something is wrong, claiming to have fallen victim to a mysterious and sudden sickness. Terrified by her erratic behavior and the intensity of her gaze, he attempts to flee, but she pursues him through the steam, pleading for him not to look away as she desperately tries to close the distance between them. After catching his hand and bringing his frantic escape to a halt, she looks him in the eye and reveals the nature of her ailment. It is a sickness known only as love. She stands before him, vulnerable and earnest, and speaks the words clearly. She has fallen in love with him. He can only stare back, his face burning with a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotion as the weight of her confession settles over the room. As their hands remain joined, he struggles to form a coherent response, his voice trailing off into uncertain murmurs. The air between them is thick with expectation, yet he finds himself unable to bridge the gap between her declaration and his own confused feelings. She throws herself toward him, her voice thick with desperation as she begs him to marry her and stay by her side forever. Her plea is raw and unfiltered, a frantic attempt to secure a future that she fears might otherwise slip through her fingers. He turns his back to her, the silence that follows her desperate proposal feeling heavier than any words. With a heavy heart, he finally delivers his answer, a quiet but firm refusal that echoes through the grand, empty hall. She watches him, her expression a mask of quiet sorrow as he begins to explain his reasoning, recalling the words of a woman named Merlene. He gently pulls his hand away, the physical disconnect mirroring the emotional distance he is now forced to maintain. He speaks of a burning desire to see the world beyond these walls, to visit distant lands and meet people from all walks of life. His dream is to broaden his horizons and experience everything the world has to offer, a goal that requires a freedom he cannot find if he stays bound to her side. He looked down, his voice steady and filled with a quiet resolve as he declared his ultimate ambition, to become a healer whose skills and compassion rivaled those of his legendary master. Hearing this, she gazed up at him with shimmering, tear-filled eyes, acknowledging the weight of his dream even as her heart sank. He gently explained that they lived in fundamentally different worlds, and despite the bond they had formed, he could not abandon his path to remain by her side in the palace. In a sudden burst of playful frustration, she reached out and squeezed his cheeks, forcing a startled, muffled sound from his lips as his face was comically squished between her hands. As he began to walk down the long, ornate hallway, she followed closely behind, finally admitting that she understood the depth of his conviction and would no longer try to hold him back. She beamed at him, her expression shifting to one of genuine warmth as she promised to support his journey with everything she had, though she couldn't resist adding a mischievous confession to lighten the mood. Looking down with a playful glint in her eyes, she teased him about the clear view she had of his naked form from her vantage point, leaving him utterly flustered as her laughter echoed through the hall. The next morning, the sun shone brightly over the towering spires of the royal castle as the day of departure finally arrived. Outside the gates, the king was a mess of tears, wailing loudly about the young man's departure while the queen sternly commanded him to compose himself. The traveler offered a polite smile, thanking them for the honor of such a grand and emotional send-off. With his pack settled firmly on his shoulders, he set off toward the horizon, his mind already focused on his next destination, a shop in the capital run by the grandchild of his mentor, Auntie Merlene. Behind him, the royal family stood in a line, the king bowing deeply as he offered his final, heartfelt thanks to the one who had saved his life and changed their world forever. The monarch stands with his family as the young healer prepares to depart. Priscilla offers a final, gentle wish for his safety, while the young man bows respectfully, excusing himself from their presence. He strides away down the stone path, his back to the palace, raising a hand in a final, energetic promise that they can rely on him. Watching his retreating figure, the monarch reflects on the young man's arrival, considering him a true blessing from the heavens. Beside him, the queen turns her gaze to their daughter, quietly questioning if she is truly at peace with his departure. She reacts with immediate, blushing flustredness as her mother bluntly asks if her feelings have blossomed into love. The king is caught off guard by the suggestion, but the young princess, despite her denial, feels a growing certainty within her heart. As she watches him vanish into the distance, she comes to a profound realization: a man of his potential cannot be confined to one place. She is now convinced that he is destined to become a hero who will one day save the entire world. This conviction ignites a new fire within her, and she vows to better herself so that she might one day be worthy of standing at his side. Her parents can only watch with a mix of amusement and bewilderment as the curtains finally close on the long ordeal that had gripped the Graham family. Meanwhile, the young traveler continues his journey, completely oblivious to the monumental impact he has left behind or the high esteem in which he is now held. Far beyond the palace walls, the majestic spires of the royal capital stand tall against the sky, marking the end of one chapter and the beginning of the young healer's true journey into the unknown. The morning sun casts long shadows across the quiet, cobblestone streets of the city, where the quaint, timber-framed buildings stand in peaceful silence. He makes his way toward a specific storefront, stopping before a sign that identifies it as the Shooting Star Atelier. Confirming he has reached his destination, the young traveler prepares to enter. Peering inside, he reminds himself of the importance of making a good first impression, knowing that his future depends on the hospitality of those within. With a slight blush of nervous anticipation, he resolves to be as polite as possible. The scene greeting him is a shock. The woman he seeks lies sprawled on the floor in total disarray, Surrounded by empty bottles and her discarded glasses, she groans in a disoriented stupor, her clothes rumpled and her dignity forgotten. Leaf arrives at the shooting star atelier, the door creaking open as he steps inside. He calls out to see if anyone is home, his gaze lingering on a framed photograph of a woman and two young children resting on a nearby shelf. He ventures further into the building, noting the strange and specialized tools scattered about the entryway. Still receiving no answer, he announces his entry once more, wondering if the place is truly abandoned. Upon pushing open the inner door, he is met with a sight of utter devastation. The room is a chaotic sea of discarded bottles, crumpled papers, and piles of refuse that reach halfway up the walls, leaving him speechless at the sheer mess. He gingerly picks up a stray garment from the floor, only to recoil in disgust as the stench of mold hits him. As he examines the filthy item, a sudden rustle from beneath a nearby pile of trash startles him, suggesting he is not alone. From the depths of the garbage, a woman emerges, clutching her head in agony as she groans about a debilitating hangover. He stands frozen in shock, realizing that the grandchild he was sent to find is not at all what he expected. She ignores his presence for a moment, desperately gulping down a glass of water to soothe her parched throat. As the liquid takes effect, she sighs in relief, claiming her entire body feels revitalized by the hydration. She finally notices him standing there and immediately recoils, her face contorting with fear and anger. She begins shouting accusations, labeling him a thief or a deviant, while he flinches and tries to stammer out an explanation. She cuts him off with a sharp command for silence, her eyes narrowing with intense suspicion. To her, any man caught in such a compromising position is a degenerate whose excuses hold no weight. She continues her verbal assault, accusing him of picking the lock to invade her home. She points aggressively at the underwear he is still holding, citing it as undeniable proof of his perverted intentions. He desperately tries to de-escalate the situation, explaining that the door was never locked in the first place. She pauses, her expression shifting to one of confusion as the realization that her home was wide open begins to sink in. He stands there, stunned, as the woman scratches her head in a daze. She mutters about being so drunk she must have forgotten to lock the door, her memory a hazy fog from the night before. Without a hint of modesty, she continues to tend to an itch, her movements sluggish and unbothered by his presence. Suddenly, the reality of the situation seems to crash down on her, and she lets out a piercing shriek that echoes through the cluttered room. He recoils from the noise, desperately pleading with her to stop the racket and, more importantly, to find some decent clothes to wear. She, however, is too busy pointing an accusing finger and branding him a pervert. The two descend into a heated bickering match, their voices clashing in the small space. He tries to lecture her on the basics of common sense and the impropriety of her state, but she remains defiant, grumbling that in her own home, she is the master of her own conduct, regardless of who barges in. She leans in dangerously close, her eyes narrowing as she defends her lack of decorum as a simple byproduct of her country upbringing, dismissing his concerns with a scoff. As she maintains her close proximity, her expression shifts from annoyance to a sudden, piercing curiosity. She falls silent, her gaze sweeping over his features as if searching for a familiar spark, whispering a half-formed question. She experiences a sudden flash of recognition, letting out a triumphant cry. He can only blink in confusion, completely caught off guard by her sudden change in demeanor as she looms over him. She lunges forward before he can even react, her weight pinning him against the floor as she peers into his eyes with an intense, almost predatory focus. Her face flushes with a mix of excitement and scrutiny, leaving him breathless and pinned under her unexpected assault. From the outside of the shooting star atelier, a muffled, strangled cry erupts, startling the birds and signaling the chaotic energy unfolding within the workshop's walls. After the initial chaos subsides, she finally presents a more composed front, having donned her glasses and a more suitable outfit. She sighs, lamenting that he should have contacted her sooner, while acknowledging his identity as the youth from the Village of Heroes. He listens intently, confirming his name is indeed Leaf. As Mercury Pendrago finally accepts the arrival of her new ward, she leans in with a knowing smirk, her glasses catching the light as she assures Leaf that his fortune is greater than he realizes. He reflects on his journey, acknowledging that despite the hardships of leaving home, coming to the royal capital was the right choice. Looking out over the sprawling, majestic spires of the capital, she points out that this bustling metropolis holds wonders and opportunities far beyond anything found in the quiet countryside. Her boots click rhythmically against the floor as she continues, explaining that this new beginning means he is no longer burdened by the expectations or relationships of his past. He is finally free to live exactly as he chooses. Turning back to him, she offers her guardianship for the time being, noting that it would be impossible to refuse a request from her grandmother. With a curious gaze, she then asks what he intends to do with this newfound liberty. In the face of her offer, Leaf's eyes ignite with a sudden, fervent spark of ambition as he declares his dream. He wants to become an adventurer and truly shine. In response to his outburst, Mercury agrees that he should register at the guild and promises to provide an introduction later that day. Hearing this, he lets out a long, relieved breath, silently concluding that despite her eccentricities, she is a genuinely kind soul. As he moves off to explore his new surroundings, Mercury watches him with a contemplative expression, musing to herself that while she expected a formidable monster from the legendary Village of Heroes, he seems like a bit of a disappointment, though clearly, her grandmother saw something special in him. Her sharp eyes narrow behind her lenses, scrutinizing his every movement as she concludes that, based on everything she has observed so far, the youth is remarkably average. Dismissing the thought for now, she informs him he can sleep wherever he finds a spot before turning to head back to her own bed, leaving him to settle into his new life. Her living quarters were a disaster zone, a chaotic sea of discarded items and forgotten papers that left no floor visible. Surveying the mess with a determined look, the young man decided it was time to get to work, donning a headscarf as he prepared to tackle the overwhelming clutter. She stirred from her slumber, blinking away the haze of sleep as the morning light filtered into the room. As her vision cleared, a muffled cry of disbelief escaped her lips at the sight of the transformation. The young man stood nearby, offering a cheerful greeting and a tray of breakfast to the stunned woman. He explained that he had spent the morning cleaning every inch of the room, but she could only stare in shock, her hunger momentarily forgotten as she processed the pristine state of her home. He was met not with gratitude, but with a sudden, explosive outburst of confusion and rage. She leaned in close, her face contorted with anger as she demanded to know why on earth he would dare to clean her room without permission. She clutched her head in despair, lamenting that the lack of filth made the space unrecognizable and utterly impossible to relax in. To her, the mess was a comfort, and this new, sterile environment felt like a foreign territory where she no longer belonged. Ignoring his attempts to soothe her, she demanded that he immediately restore the room to its previous state of squalor. She insisted that she would rather die than spend another minute in such a clean environment, while he pleaded for her to just try and relax for a moment. He sheepishly explained his methods, mentioning a special detergent gifted by someone he called aniray to purify the area. He admitted that his goal was to turn the room into a holy domain, unaware of the weight that name carried. The name triggered a visceral reaction, causing her unique eye to flare with intensity as she realized the terrifying truth behind the Annie he spoke of. She trembled as she connected the dots, realizing that say could only refer to the great holy maiden Seafort, the human closest to the goddess herself. Before her stood the undeniable proof of a power far beyond her understanding, a space truly transformed into a sanctified realm. The sign on the wall confirmed the reality of the situation, leaving her to wonder just what kind of monster she had invited into her home. She reels back, clutching her head as she groans in disbelief while the true nature of the holy domain sinks in. This isn't just a clean room. It is a barrier of absolute purity, a sanctified space so potent that it not only prevents any speck of dirt from gathering, but also serves as an eternal ward that repels monsters forever. Her voice echoes through the quiet streets from within the building, a frantic cry of exasperation that shatters the silence. She demands to know what has possessed him to act with such casual disregard for the divine, finally accepting that his absurd capabilities could only originate from a place as legendary as his home village. Leaf stands at the threshold of a new chapter, his eyes wide with wonder as a welcoming voice rings out. He can hardly contain his excitement, letting out a gasp of pure amazement at the sight before him. The interior of the Sacred Gemstone Adventurers Guild is breathtaking, a vast hall of marble and light that speaks of prestige and power. Grand staircases sweep upward toward a vaulted ceiling, and the air is thick with the hum of activity from the elite who gather here. He continues to marvel at the opulence, noting how stylish everything appears and how the ceiling seems to reach for the heavens. Beside him, his companion watches in silence, her expression unreadable as she processes the weight of their arrival at such a renowned institution. She begins to harbor doubts, her gaze narrowing as she considers the consequences of his potential fame. If he were to become a renowned figure within these walls, it would surely draw the attention of dangerous elements, and she wonders if bringing him here was truly the right choice. A dark memory flickers through her mind, the stern face of her grandmother looming over her with a terrifying intensity. She knows all too well that failure or bringing unwanted attention could result in a swift and merciless punishment from her elder. Driven by this sudden fear, she attempts to steer him away, stammering that perhaps joining this particular guild isn't the best path forward after all. He pauses, caught off guard by her sudden change of heart and the visible panic in her eyes. The young man, however, is undeterred, his enthusiasm pushing him forward as he urges her to hurry with the registration process. He calls out to her with a bright, infectious energy, his mind already set on the adventures that await. His face is flushed with a genuine, innocent joy, a smile so pure that it seems to radiate from within. It is the look of someone whose dreams are finally within reach, untainted by the cynicism of the world. Seeing that radiant expression, she finds her resolve crumbling, unable to bring herself to crush his burgeoning hopes. She turns away in a flurry of internal conflict, her mind racing as she tries to reconcile her fears with the happiness she sees in him. Their arrival is soon noticed by a familiar face, a cheerful receptionist named Nina who greets them with a warm, knowing smile. She expresses her delight at seeing her old acquaintance again before turning her curious gaze toward the boy, wondering if he is the one she had heard so much about. She accepts the request without hesitation, her eyes lighting up at the prospect of registering the newcomer. Mercury explains that the young man wishes to join the guild, and the receptionist's enthusiasm is immediate and overwhelming. As the young man looks on in confusion, she fixes him with an uncomfortably intense stare, her gaze lingering far longer than professional courtesy requires. Her composure dissolves completely as she begins to drool, her face flushed with a feverish heat, and her eyes wide with a predatory hunger that borders on the deranged. Chanting heavily, she addresses him with an overly familiar nickname, Leafy, and insists that he follow her immediately to handle the necessary paperwork, her excitement clearly reaching a breaking point. Because he admits his inexperience with such formal documentation, she leans in dangerously close, her voice dropping to a sultry whisper as she reassures her cutie pie that there is nothing to worry about. The situation escalates as she moves behind him, her breath hot against his neck while she promises to teach him every single thing he needs to know, her tongue darting out in anticipation. In a shocking display of unprofessionalism, she actually licks his ear, leaving him frozen in a state of pure, unadulterated panic as he wonders what kind of madness he has stumbled into. Seeing the harassment, Mercury finally intervenes, demanding that the predator receptionist cease her actions, though the woman merely counters that his ears looked too delicious to resist. As she pulls him away from the counter, the receptionist doesn't back down, instead questioning if her old acquaintance has developed her own romantic designs on the young man. Once they are safely outside the guild's walls, the young man reflects on how the women in the city are far more intense than he expected. Mercury, however, simply brushes it off with a smirk, claiming that her actions are merely those of a dedicated caretaker protecting him from harm. She begins by explaining the vast landscape of the royal capital, noting that while there are countless guilds for doctors, alchemists, and businessmen, one stands above the rest. Leaning in close, she whispers a warning to the young man about the receptionist's predatory nature toward younger recruits, just as the woman herself enthusiastically declares the Adventurers Guild to be the shining star of the city. The receptionist, her composure slipping into a daze, inquires about his specific vocation, only to be met with the earnest revelation that he is a healer. This news sends her into a frantic state of disbelief, as she insists that healers have no place in the Adventurers Guild. Her agitation so great, she begins to tug at her own collar. Even his companion finds herself in rare agreement with the receptionist, urging him to reconsider his path for his own safety, much to his bewilderment at their sudden unity. Overwhelmed by the thought that he might never follow in his master's footsteps, he begins to weep, prompting both women to immediately shift their tone and offer their full, albeit chaotic, support. Seeing an opportunity to resolve the impasse, the receptionist proposes a special trial for entry into the Sacred Gemstone Guild and calls upon a small companion for assistance. From the depths of her attire, she produces a small, pale dragon that chirps with a sharp cry as it is presented for the test. She explains that this unique creature reacts to the magic power of others, changing its hue based on the specific type of mana it absorbs. Instructing him to pour his magic into the creature, she watches expectantly, while his companion silently notes that a mana trial is far safer than a combat test, where his destructive power might prove fatal. She watches with a mix of curiosity and caution as Leaf prepares for the trial. When Mercury asks if only the color changes, she explains that while that's the norm, a massive influx of magic could theoretically cause the creature to grow in size. Leaf, undeterred and fueled by a desperate need to prove himself, vows to give it everything he has, channeling a torrent of mana into the small dragon. The result is instantaneous and catastrophic. The once tiny Weiss erupts into a colossal, prehistoric beast that towers over the city buildings, its roar echoing through the streets. Panic seizes the townspeople as they flee in terror from the sudden appearance of a true dragon in their midst. He stands amidst the settling dust, looking around in a daze as the massive presence vanishes as quickly as it appeared. Unsure of what exactly transpired or the scale of the chaos he just caused, he tentatively asks if his performance was enough to pass the trial. She is utterly transfixed, her professional demeanor shattered by the raw display of power. With a heavy blush staining her cheeks and her eyes swirling in a dazed, predatory trance, she can only stammer out a confession of sudden, intense affection. While the receptionist loses all composure and begins chasing the bewildered young man with declarations of love, Mercury can only clutch her stomach in agony. The stress of the public disturbance and the sheer absurdity of the situation is more than her nerves can handle. Even the small dragon seems exhausted by the ordeal, watching the unfolding madness with a skeptical, weary gaze. The air is still filled with the receptionist's enthusiastic cries, leaving the creature to wonder what kind of chaos its new companion has truly unleashed. Far from the capital, in the quiet outskirts of a distant village, a signpost stands as a bitter reminder of the reputation he left behind. It marks a dead end, scrawled with insults that label him a coward, a stark contrast to the power he just displayed. She slams her fist onto a table in a fit of pique, her face twisted in a scowl as she fumes over his departure. Convinced that her attempts to control him were acts of kindness, she spitefully hopes that a medicine freak like him will never find success in the wider world. Long ago, the Vazrark family were mere commoners, living simple lives far from the trappings of nobility. Because of their bravery, the patriarch stood as a shield for the villagers against marauding beasts, eventually earning a noble title and a domain of his own. This legacy of courage earned them the title of Monster Warden of the North, a name that commanded respect across the frozen reaches. However, the current head of the house, a man named Okaran, cares little for such noble history, laughing boisterously as he mocks the old fools while surrounded by piles of gold. He smirks over a glass of wine, relishing the fact that the Vazrarks now hold the key to all monetary circulation in the land. Gold coins rain down into overflowing chests, a cold testament to his greed and the exploitation of his family's hard-won status. Surrounded by his attendants, he raises a toast to his own supposed brilliance, declaring himself a genius with an astute business mind. The man continues his boastful tirade, gloating about how he seized a local medicine shop and claimed a young village girl for his own amusement. His self-congratulation is suddenly interrupted by a messenger who brings word that the chief of Ein village is desperately awaiting an answer regarding their defenses. The Lord stares blankly at the news, his confusion only fading when he is reminded of the recent monster attacks and the heavy casualties the village has suffered. The Lord of the Domain sat comfortably in his opulent study as a report was delivered regarding the village nearest the Abyss Forest. The messenger warned that monster activity had risen drastically, but the news seemed to fall on deaf ears as the nobleman remained preoccupied with his own comfort. He scoffed at the report, his face twisting with a cold, mercenary indifference. To him, the pain and suffering of some random village meant nothing if they weren't generating profit, and he had no intention of wasting time on nobodies when an important visitor was expected. Because the messenger persisted in his plea for the village, he simply fired the man on the spot, his patience completely exhausted by the mention of the struggling commoners. Moments later, he was alerted to the arrival of his guest, prompting him to spring into action with a sudden burst of energy. He dismissed the former employee with a final, sharp command to gather his things and vanish from sight immediately. The doors opened to reveal Jasmine Ku, the formidable guild master of the world's greatest guild. The Lord immediately shifted his demeanor, welcoming her with a sycophantic enthusiasm that masked his earlier cruelty, desperate to impress a woman of such high standing. As she stood before him, her presence was overwhelming, her beauty as breathtaking as the legendary reputation that preceded her every move. He marveled at her, calculating the immense wealth and power she wielded to influence world affairs. In his mind, securing an amicable relationship with a woman of her influence was the only thing that mattered for his future prosperity. She wasted no time on pleasantries, taking a seat and moving directly to the matter at hand with a professional coldness. The Lord remained overconfident, certain that his supposed talent for business would ensure a successful and profitable negotiation. However, his confidence shattered when she calmly announced that the guild was severing all ties with the Vazrark family and their entire domain. He stammered in disbelief, his face pale as he demanded an explanation for such a sudden and catastrophic decision. She looked at him with cold, piercing eyes, revealing that his downfall was a direct consequence of his own arrogance. He had unknowingly angered a person to whom she owed a profound debt, an elderly resident of the place known as Dead End. She explains that her decision to form a coalition was specifically for the sake of Dead End, yet his actions have completely undermined that goal, rendering their partnership impossible. In response, the nobleman erupts in a frantic protest, questioning if she truly understands the weight of severing such a lucrative connection. He desperately reminds her of his wife's lineage, claiming she is the granddaughter of the legendary healer, Asclepius. Unmoved, the guild master reveals her own intelligence on the matter, noting that the village elders had taken a liking to a certain young man. She adds pointedly that this very granddaughter was once betrothed to a man named Lee. The realization hits him like a physical blow, his face contorting as he finally understands that the boy he dismissed was the linchpin of the entire arrangement. Desperation takes hold as he throws himself to the floor, his forehead striking the ground with a heavy thud. He pleads for a second chance, promising to offer any apology necessary to those he has wronged. She looks down at him with cold indifference, stating that an apology to her is worthless. She makes it clear that only the forgiveness of the villagers themselves could change the situation, before turning her back on his pathetic display. While he remains pressed against the floor, a dark, calculating thought crosses his mind. He refuses to let his grand ambitions wither in this backwater region, believing that his submissive act will eventually sway the seemingly inexperienced guildmaster. The heavy doors swing open as a young woman bursts into the room, her voice dripping with disdain as she mocks the elderly residents of Dead End. She gleefully suggests a scheme to quintuple the prices of goods, preying on the villagers' desperation. Beside her, the nobleman freezes in terror, realizing her ill-timed greed has just sealed his fate. With a final, sharp dismissal, the guildmaster bids him farewell, hoping they never cross paths again. He is left scrambling in a state of pure panic as the doors of opportunity slam shut forever. A messenger approaches the heavy doors of the estate, his voice echoing as he requests an audience with Sir Arthur of Dead End to discuss the financial outlook. Inside, Lord Ocaron slumps in utter defeat, the weight of his ruined prospects crushing him. His wife, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of their situation, chirps a playful question that only deepens his despair. He suddenly snaps, his hand striking her face with a sharp crack that echoes through the room. He snarls, calling her a foolish woman as she stares back in stunned silence. The nobleman's rage boils over as he screams that this ruin is entirely her fault, his voice cracking with the desperation of a man who has lost everything. Amidst their bitter shouting match, a frantic servant attempts to announce a new arrival, but his words are nearly drowned out by the domestic chaos. The messenger finally breaks through the noise, delivering news that turns Ocaron's anger into cold dread. A massive swarm of monsters has breached the borders of Ein village and is marching toward the heart of the Vazrark domain. This approaching army is a nightmare of fur, tusk, and wing, a relentless tide of beasts trampling everything in their path. The realization of this new threat leaves the Lord trembling, his face pale as the true scale of the impending disaster sinks in. Elsewhere, Mercury watches the unfolding absurdity of her own surroundings with a look of pure, unadulterated confusion. She finds Leaf completely submerged in a sea of doting women, their sympathetic cries and eager attention leaving the young man looking utterly overwhelmed. The mage demands to know how he managed to find himself in such a ridiculous predicament, to which he sheepishly explains that he was merely telling them stories of his home village. Later, he gazes out over the sprawling city, his thoughts drifting back to Dakwona with a quiet hope for its safety. He senses that his time in this place is drawing to a close, the fleeting peace of the moment already beginning to slip away. Leaf has officially become an adventurer after passing the mana trial with flying colors. He walks away from the guild headquarters, feeling a profound sense of relief after his initial worries about the examination. He is joined by Mercury as they embark on their very first official request, gathering medical herbs in a lush, open field. The young man is visibly grateful that their debut task is relatively straightforward and safe. Turning back with a confident grin, he casually mentions his desire to hunt an ancient dragon for their next outing. His companion exhales a sharp sigh of relief, thankful he hadn't voiced such a reckless ambition during the formal request process. She questions if he is truly comfortable with her tagging along, given her lingering hangover from the previous night's celebrations. While he insists he could have managed the task solo to avoid causing her trouble, she reminds him of the guild's strict safety protocols for beginners, which mandate a partnership for all early missions. The sorceress then drops a bombshell, revealing that despite his successful trial, he has been placed at the very bottom of the hierarchy, F rank. He is completely stunned, his jaw dropping as the reality of his lowly status within the guild sinks in. She explains the ladder of progression, detailing the ranks from the humble F tier up to the legendary SS rank. Advancement is tied directly to one's contributions and reputation within the guild, with higher tiers granting access to increasingly perilous and lucrative missions. Undeterred by the long road ahead, the youth declares his intention to climb the ranks as quickly as possible. His mentor simply chuckles, patting him on the shoulder and remarking on his youthful enthusiasm with a patronizing air. Her tone shifts to one of stern warning as she cautions him against underestimating the complexity of simple herb gathering. She points out a specific plant, noting that discerning the medicinal variety from its lookalikes is a difficult skill that requires a keen eye. Holding up a specimen for comparison, she describes the poisonous Yakakakushi herb, which is nearly indistinguishable from the desired medical plants. Even seasoned experts, she notes, often struggle to tell them apart, making the task far more dangerous than it appears. Before she can finish her lecture, she realizes he has already harvested a massive, overflowing pile of greenery. Panicked by his lack of caution, she shouts for him to stop immediately, realizing the potential danger he has blindly gathered in his haste. She stares in disbelief at the massive pile of vegetation, her mind reeling at the sheer volume. She had expected a novice's struggle, but this was beyond abnormal. Beside her, the young man simply chuckles, seemingly oblivious to her shock. She demands to know how he could possibly distinguish the medicinal plants from the poisonous ones in such a chaotic heap. He puffs out his chest with pride, explaining that such tasks have been second nature to him since childhood, dismissing his skill as the simple result of being a country bumpkin. He then reveals his method is far simpler than she imagined. He just calls for them. With a bright smile and a sharp clap of his hands, he addresses the surrounding flora as if they were old friends. The young man commands the herbs to gather, and to her utter bewilderment, the plants begin to rustle and move on their own. They scurry across the ground like small creatures, answering his call with impossible autonomy. She loses all composure, grabbing him by the shoulders and screaming for an explanation of what magic he could possibly be using. He tries to soothe her, looking slightly overwhelmed by her intense reaction to what he considers a mundane task. He clarifies the situation with a sheepish grin, explaining that the secret isn't complex magic, but rather his ability to communicate directly with the herbs. They stand in the quiet field for a long moment, the weight of his revelation hanging in the air as she struggles to process the absurdity of his claim. He continues his explanation, recalling how he initially struggled to differentiate the plants until his master taught him the art of listening to their individual voices. The young man gazes at the herbs with genuine affection, crediting his master's wisdom for the ease with which he handles his work today. Behind him, she can only let out a long, weary sigh, her worldview thoroughly shaken. She feels a dull ache behind her eyes, desperately trying to blame her confusion on a lingering hangover rather than the impossible reality before her. It seems that in the village of heroes, even the most basic tasks defy all logic. She stares blankly as the realization hits her. Leaf had just pointed out that the herbs she was so intently smelling contained a potent aphrodisiac. The accidental exposure begins to take hold immediately, catching her completely off guard. Her vision blurs as a deep, feverish flush spreads across her cheeks. The effects of the plant are far more rapid and intense than she could have anticipated, clouding her judgment and making her breath hitch. Sensing her distress, the young man reaches out to steady her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. She can only gasp in response, her voice trembling as she admits that a sudden, overwhelming heat is surging through her entire body, making it difficult to even stand. The scholar collapses to her knees, her breath coming in ragged hitches. She clutches at her chest, her mind racing to comprehend the strange, pulsing sensations that are now completely dominating her senses and overriding her logic. Driven by an impulse she can no longer control, she suddenly lunges forward, pinning her companion to the forest floor. He cries out in shock, his eyes wide with disbelief as he is forced onto his back by her sudden, aggressive shift in behavior. Hovering over him, her eyes wide and searching, she poses a question that cuts through the chaos of the moment. She demands to know his true feelings for her, her voice a mix of desperation and raw desire that leaves no room for a simple answer. He is left speechless, his face turning a shade of crimson that rivals her own as she presses closer. The sheer intensity of her gaze and the physical proximity of her body leave him paralyzed with a mixture of fear and confusion, unable to find the words to respond. A frantic cry echoes through the quiet woods, a desperate sound of panic that startles the local wildlife. The situation in the clearing has reached a breaking point, far beyond anything either of them expected from a simple herb-gathering trip. Sometime later, the scene shifts back to the familiar, bustling halls of the guild. The quiet of the forest is replaced by the low hum of conversation and the steady rhythm of daily business as adventurers go about their tasks. The pair finally returns, though their demeanor is anything but normal. While the receptionist greets them with her usual cheer, she quickly notices their disheveled state, one appearing utterly drained and traumatized, while the other can barely stand still, her hands fidgeting nervously as she avoids eye contact. She stared in disbelief as the news reached her ears. A venomous hydra was running rampant. The sheer absurdity of the situation left her wide-eyed, her glasses slipping slightly as she processed the magnitude of the threat. In response to her shock, the receptionist explained that while the guild's top rankers were doing their best to contain the beast, the number of casualties was rising steadily. This only deepened the confusion, as such a dangerous level 5 monster was typically known for its docile nature, making this sudden aggression even more baffling. Desperate for a solution, the young woman turned her attention toward the apprentice, pleading for his assistance. She begged him to provide the medicine they so desperately needed to treat the wounded, her hands clasped in an urgent prayer for help. Before the request could even settle, he presented the completed vials, having worked with a speed that defied belief. The sight left his companion leaning back in sheer amazement, unable to comprehend how he had finished the task so quickly. Overjoyed by the miracle, she showered him with gratitude, her relief palpable as she accepted the supplies. He simply explained that the medicinal herbs they had gathered earlier in the forest were exactly what was required for the cure. Despite his success, the young man began to fidget nervously, his fingers intertwining as doubt crept in. He voiced his concern that a mere newcomer like himself would likely only be a hindrance in such a high-stakes battle. However, a sudden spark of determination lit up his eyes as he asked if he could join the subjugation mission himself. While his companions looked on in surprise, the lingering effects of the forest's plants seemed to catch up with the sorceress, who suddenly doubled over, feeling the onset of another wave of illness. The Hydra subjugation troops have established a sprawling field base at the foot of the mountains, a cluster of sturdy tents serving as their temporary headquarters in the wilderness. Inside the main pavilion, the air is thick with the low hum of activity as soldiers and staff move with purpose, preparing for the coming conflict against the multi-headed beast. Amidst the bustle, a sudden glow emanates from a soldier's arm, his flesh knitting back together so rapidly that he can only stare in disbelief at the miracle occurring before his eyes. He looks up at his healer, the young traveler who arrived just in time, while the sorceress nearby breathes a sigh of relief, glad that her companion's talents are being put to such vital use in this crisis. They move through the long rows of cots where the wounded lie, the sheer number of casualties a grim testament to the ferocity of the beast they are hunting and the desperate need for medical aid. As the young man replenishes the medical supplies, the gratitude of the camp follows him, his presence having become a beacon of hope for those who thought their wounds were mortal. Nearby, a map is spread across a table, detailing the Hydra's relentless march toward the royal capital, a path of destruction that leaves no room for delay or hesitation. The commander adjusts his glasses, his brow furrowed as he warns of the other aggressive monsters drawn to the Hydra's wake, but his words are cut short by a sudden, thunderous commotion at the entrance. The tent flaps burst open as a trio of formidable warriors strides in, their arrival met with a roar of recognition from the weary soldiers who shout the name of their champion, Ariel. Leading the group is Ariel Champrode, flanked by his companions Mab Yiga and Yoro Teensroad, their confident expressions signaling that the tide of battle is about to turn in their favor. He stands at the forefront of the arrival, greeted by the cheers of the soldiers who see his presence as a guarantee of victory. The commander welcomes the trio with relief, acknowledging their long-awaited arrival. As the crowd erupts in excitement for the counterattack, Mercury watches the newcomers with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, questioning their identity while the name Ariel echoes through the base. They are the legendary Twilight Dragon, one of the few elite S-rank parties hailing from the royal capital, their reputation preceding them as they stand ready to face the Hydra. The young traveler stares in awe, his eyes wide as he realizes he is standing in the presence of true legends of the adventuring world. He is completely starstruck, his heart racing as he admires those he considers the apex of all adventurers, until the leader of the group suddenly addresses him directly. The swordsman approaches with a confident stride, looking the boy over before questioning which guild claims him, noting that his face is unfamiliar. He leans in aggressively when met with silence, his voice rising as he demands an answer, wondering if the boy is too stunned to speak. The veteran adventurer pauses, his sharp eyes scanning the flustered youth who can barely find his words under such intense scrutiny. After a tense moment of evaluation, a smirk plays on his lips as he admits that the boy's aura isn't half bad, much to the youngster's shock. He then reveals that he has already deduced the boy's identity, confirming that he must be the one named Leaf, leaving the young healer wondering how his reputation could have reached such a famous figure. He offers a casual smirk, expressing his gratitude to the young healer for his hard work, He mentions that Nina had spoken of the boy's efforts with the wounded, a revelation that leaves the apprentice wide-eyed with surprise. Beside him, the spiky-haired warrior marvels at his leader's ability to spot potential so quickly before his attention shifts to the arrival of the disheveled mage. The young apprentice can only stare in silence, blushing awe at the legendary figures standing before him. She adjusts her focus, explaining that her presence is merely to ensure the F-rank novice doesn't stumble into unnecessary chaos. The dark-haired woman in their party nods, finally understanding the logic behind the boy's inclusion in their group. Seizing the moment, the boy eagerly asks the charismatic leader for the secret to becoming as formidable and composed as he is. The veteran adventurer sighs, muttering about the stifling nature of guild regulations that govern their actions. The conversation is violently interrupted as a massive, chitinous nightmare, a giant ant, breaches the perimeter of the base. Panic erupts instantly as the towering insect looms over the gathered crowd. As civilians scramble for safety, the leader barks orders, calling for his teammates to move into position. The spiky-haired fighter acknowledges the command with a grin, ready to engage the beast. His expression darkens with a cold, righteous fury as he stares down the creature, insulted by its audacity to threaten his people. He declares with chilling certainty that any monster daring to harm his comrades will not survive the encounter. With a thunderous roar, he unleashes a devastating technique, his fist becoming a blur of concentrated power. The Helix fist strikes with the force of a natural disaster, tearing through the air and the earth alike. The threat is vaporized in an instant, dismissed as a mere small fry by the elite warriors. Watching from the sidelines, the young healer is mesmerized by the absolute trust and synchronized strength the party displayed. The dust settles as the warriors regroup, with the spiky-haired man sheepishly admitting he might have been a bit too enthusiastic. Their leader offers a brief apology for the overkill, while the dark-haired woman reflects on the true essence of a unified party, leaving the apprentice more inspired than ever. He stands before the legendary warrior, listening as Ariel questions if he truly desires to reach their level of strength and become more like them. Clenching his fist with conviction, the veteran explains that their power stems from a foundation of flawless teamwork and absolute, boundless trust. This bond is forged in a bizarrely candid manner, as the members of the Twilight Dragon, Mab, Yoro, and Ariel himself, begin shouting their most private and eccentric desires to the heavens, claiming that such radical honesty is the key to their unity. Turning his intense gaze back to the young traveler, Ariel demands to know his own hidden inclinations, insisting that true trust can only be born when such vulnerabilities are shared openly. Caught in the heat of the moment and the overwhelming pressure of the group, he finally cracks, shouting his preference for well-endowed women at the top of his lungs, earning a smirk of approval from the seasoned leader. With the bonding complete, the party marches off toward their next objective, leaving a bewildered Mercury behind to wonder what she just witnessed as they prepare to face the Hydra. Far from the strange camaraderie of the base, a different scene unfolds on a desolate battlefield where broken soldiers lie amidst the rubble, their desperate prayers for salvation echoing through the smoke. One of the few remaining guards watches in paralyzed terror as a massive, scaled form slithers through the ruins, the ground trembling beneath its weight. Before him rises the nightmare itself, a colossal Hydra, its multiple heads snapping and hissing as it looms over the carnage, leaving the soldier to wonder how anyone could possibly defeat such a monster. A toucan perches amidst the dense foliage of a tropical jungle, its presence a silent witness to the arrival of the group. The air is thick with the humidity of a place known to locals as the Valley of Death. Emerging into a small clearing, the group scans their surroundings with wary eyes. Ban breaks the silence, noting the eerie lack of any presence and wondering if their target is truly hiding within this verdant maze. Suddenly, the ground gives way beneath the light-haired boy, sending him tumbling toward a steep drop. Leaf and the others react with a start, their focus snapping to the sudden danger. He manages to scramble back up the rocky ledge, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he realizes how close he came to a fatal plunge. The sheer drop of the cliff face serves as a grim reminder of the valley's reputation. Looking out over the vast, scarred landscape, the group reflects on the history of this desolate region. It is a place born from the devastation of a great war in the distant past, a scar on the earth that has earned its name. The dark-haired girl offers a playful, almost mischievous smile, teasing the boy about his near-death experience. He, however, is far from amused, still reeling from the shock of nearly falling into what he describes as a literal hell on earth. Consulting her map, the girl with glasses confirms their position, noting that this valley runs dangerously close to the royal capital. Despite the treacherous terrain, she is confident they are on the correct path. Leaf suddenly stops, his nostrils flaring as he catches a scent on the wind. Ban notices the change in his companion's demeanor immediately, realizing that their quarry is no longer just a distant threat. He steps to the edge of a massive, yawning crater, staring down into the darkness. The source of the scent, and the danger they seek, is directly beneath them. As the light-haired boy expresses his dread at the mention of the Hydra, Leaf takes charge. He decides to scout ahead into the depths, promising to maintain contact through telepathy to ensure they aren't caught off guard by the lack of information on their enemy. He leaps into the abyss without hesitation, his white coat billowing behind him as he descends. His companions' voices fade into the distance, their cries of concern left far above the crater's rim. After a long drop, he touches down on the jagged floor of the canyon, the impact echoing through the narrow, shadowed pass. Looking back at the sheer cliffs he just descended, he realizes that returning to the surface will be a grueling task that might cost him dearly. The sound of shifting stone nearby puts him on high alert. Moving deeper into the ravine, he discovers the grim fate of those who came before. Several figures lie motionless among the rocks, their belongings scattered, including a discarded tag marking them as seekers of a sacred gemstone. A cold fury settles over him as he surveys the carnage, his jaw tightening with a silent promise to bring hell to the creature responsible for this slaughter. He stands alone amidst the fallen, his back to the path he took, when a casual greeting cuts through the oppressive silence of the valley. The massive, scaled head of the Hydra lunges from the shadows, its eyes fixed on him with predatory intent. Undeterred by its size, he challenges the beast, welcoming a one-on-one confrontation with the overgrown serpent. The creature strikes with a thunderous blow that shatters the ground, but he remains focused, noting the shimmering, toxic film that coats the monster's scales like a suit of armor. Seizing an opening, he sprints up the creature's massive, undulating neck, declaring his intent to tear through its defenses with a specialized combat style. With a surge of power, he unleashes his signature Helix Fist, the force of the strike rippling through the Hydra's skull as he delivers a devastating blow to the ancient dragon. He reels from the impact, the ground crumbling beneath him as a massive plume of dust and debris erupts into the air. Despite the force of his strike, he feels a sense of unease, noting that the impact didn't feel right. There was no clean feedback from the blow, as if he had struck something hollow or shifting. As the dust begins to settle, the massive beast looms over him, its slit-pupiled eye fixed on his position. To his utter shock, the creature's maw opens, and it rasps out his name, questioning his identity with a chilling, guttural voice. The revelation leaves him momentarily paralyzed, his mind racing to reconcile the fact that a member of the ancient dragon race is capable of speech, a feat previously unheard of. Sensing the danger, his companion leaps into the fray, equally bewildered by the creature's sudden display of intelligence. The monster doesn't wait for them to recover, rearing its long neck back before unleashing a spray of corrosive venom. His ally narrowly avoids the liquid death, his mind still reeling from the impossible fact that the beast somehow knows his friend's name. He throws himself into a desperate roll as the venom sizzles against the stone where he stood just a second before. Nearby, his comrade hits the ground hard, struggling to find his footing amidst the relentless barrage of attacks from the towering serpent. He quickly moves to shield his friend, the air rushing around them as they narrowly escape another devastating strike. With a grimace and a hint of his usual bravado, he checks on his companion, admitting that the last exchange was far too close for comfort. The battle intensifies as the Hydra lunges again, its massive jaws snapping inches from them while they scramble for safety. He feels the weight of the situation pressing down on him, realizing that his initial plan has gone awry and they are now fighting for their lives against an unpredictable foe. Seeing his friend in peril, the young medic finds a new well of resolve and pushes himself back up, shouting his intent to help. Just as he speaks, a massive explosion rocks the area, sending a shockwave through the crater. He stands firm alongside his leader, his eyes filled with a newfound determination to contribute to the fight. No longer content to stay on the sidelines, he accepts his role as a vital member of the team, ready to face whatever the ancient dragon throws at them next. The massive, multi-headed serpent towers over the small group, its presence a suffocating weight. Ban, the young medic, steels his resolve, knowing he must contribute his full strength to the team's survival as they face this overwhelming threat. Suddenly, the beast strikes, its massive head crashing down with a deafening crack that shatters the earth beneath them. He watches with wide eyes, sensing the impending danger as the creature prepares its next move. As Leaf leaps into the fray, the young alchemist calls out, insisting he is unharmed and needs only to close the distance. He begins the process of drug creation, confident that the monster's venomous strikes will be useless against his specialized knowledge. High above, the warrior with the pompadour activates a potent muscle-strengthening agent, amplifying his power 100-fold. With a roar, he clenches his fist and unleashes a devastating megaton punch directly into the creature's maw. The impact is immense, yet instead of solid bone and flesh, the monster's head erupts into a chaotic splash of fluid. He stares in disbelief as his fist passes through the creature, realizing with a jolt of alarm that something is fundamentally wrong. The massive form of the Hydra begins to crumble, its physical shape dissolving into a torrential downpour of liquid that floods the surrounding area. The warrior quickly retreats, his boots splashing through the newly formed pools of venom. He catches his companion in a firm grip, pulling him to safety as the immediate threat recedes. When the boy offers his gratitude, the older fighter simply shakes his head, noting that protecting his teammates is his duty alone. Leaning in close, the warrior's expression turns grave as he prepares to share a critical realization. He urges the young medic to listen carefully, for the true nature of their foe has finally become clear. He explains that the creature they face is not a beast of flesh and blood, but a venomous hydra existing entirely in a liquid state. This revelation hangs heavy in the air as they look out over the shifting, toxic waters. He continues his explanation, noting that while he initially thought the poison was a mere defense, magic power actually gives the venom its form. This makes his own physical techniques a poor match for such an ethereal enemy, a fact the young alchemist now fully grasps as he observes the creature's true, fluid nature. He turns to his companion, desperation tinging his voice as he asks if the healer has any tricks left to bring the beast down. Nearby, the massive serpent scans the area, its head swaying with predatory intent. Because of this inquiry, the young medic pauses, his hand to his chin as the pieces of the puzzle fall into place. He realizes that if the monster is truly a liquid form of venom, then a specific chemical countermeasure is their only hope. Moments later, he explains that a potent antidote might be the key to neutralizing the creature's magical cohesion. The two warriors share a brief, determined look, agreeing to put the plan into motion immediately. As they prepare to split up, the older fighter gives the boy a firm, encouraging tap on the shoulder, offering a crude but heartfelt word of confidence. Before the medic can even react to the strange compliment, his ally has already vanished into the brush, leaving him to focus on the task at hand. Meanwhile, the agile warrior begins his distraction, leaping between the rocky outcroppings to draw the Hydra's gaze. He taunts the massive reptile, mocking its slow reactions as it struggles to track his rapid movements. In response to the creature's frustration, he delivers a stinging blow to one of its heads, calling it nothing more than an overgrown snake. The strike is a mere diversion, designed to keep the beast's attention fixed firmly on him. Seeing his opening, the medic lunges forward, his voice echoing through the clearing as he unleashes his creation. He hurls the concentrated antidote with everything he has, aiming for the heart of the liquid mass. The impact triggers a violent reaction, sending a massive plume of white vapor billowing into the sky. The forest is momentarily swallowed by the expanding cloud as the chemical agent begins to work against the Hydra's venomous form. As the mist begins to settle, the two companions watch with bated breath, waiting to see if their gamble paid off. The silence that follows the explosion is heavy with anticipation. However, the hope quickly fades as the young medic stares in disbelief at the sight before him. Despite the direct hit, the creature remains, prompting a frustrated click of the tongue from his partner as they realize the battle is far from over. He stands frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief as the massive serpent looms over them, completely unaffected by the specialized serum. Beside him, the leader demands to know what is happening, unable to comprehend how their trump card failed so utterly against the beast. Recalling a lesson from his mentor, he realizes this anomaly matches a specific, dire scenario where conventional medicine is rendered useless. The word miasma escapes his lips as he stares at the dark energy swirling around the creature, a realization that changes the nature of the entire conflict. This revelation sends a ripple of shock through his companions, who struggle to grasp the implications of such a corruptive force. He explains that while the exact details are murky, a demonic presence must be acting from the shadows, orchestrating this unnatural aggression and shielding the monster from their attacks. The warrior narrows his eyes, noting that under normal circumstances, these creatures are known for their docility and rarely venture near human settlements to cause such devastation. The current situation is a complete perversion of the natural order, confirming that an outside influence is at play. Staring into the glowing, malevolent eyes of the beast, the young healer understands that the miasma is the final, missing piece of this deadly puzzle. It is the corrupting influence driving the creature into a mindless, destructive frenzy that no simple antidote can touch. As the group watches the massive form coil, they realize that if left unchecked, the monster will eventually descend upon the royal capital. Desperation mounts as the leader turns to his friend, pleading for any possible way to halt the impending catastrophe before it reaches the heart of the kingdom. His mind flashes back to a moment with his mentor, who had once grinned with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. The old man had admitted that while some conditions cannot be cured by traditional means, they can still be defeated, even as he teased his pupil for his narrow perspective on the art of healing. In that memory, the master had gestured to the laboratory, explaining that true medicine is the culmination of centuries of ancestral wisdom and relentless innovation. It was never meant to be a simple solution handed down on a platter, but a testament to human ingenuity and the drive to overcome the impossible. The image of his teacher's hand steadily writing out a formula remains vivid, accompanied by the stern reminder that if the path were easy, anyone could walk it. True mastery requires more than just following a recipe. It requires the will to forge a new way forward when the old ways fail. Snapping back to the present, he hears the voices of his friends calling out to him, their faces etched with concern and hope. He remembers the final piece of advice. To become a first-class healer, one must look beyond what has already been given and find the answer within the chaos of the present. He stood firm, his eyes burning with a newfound resolve as he declared that it was far too early to surrender. A confident smile played on his lips while he explained that he might have just discovered the key to their victory. Van begins by explaining that their only hope for survival lies in a specific, high-stakes plan. Leaf nods in solemn agreement, fully acknowledging the gravity of the situation they face. He then turns his attention to the rest of the group, his expression hardening as he prepares to ask a significant favor of them all. The others look on with a mix of curiosity and apprehension, waiting to hear what he has devised. He delivers a startling request. They must escape immediately, fleeing all the way back to the royal capital. The suggestion leaves his companions in a state of utter disbelief, struggling to process the sudden order to retreat. They begin to move, though the young woman questions the logic of such a sudden retreat. The group starts to disperse as the plan, however nonsensical it seems, is set into motion. She continues to protest, demanding an explanation for why they are fleeing instead of fighting. Leaf, focused on the task ahead, promises to explain everything later as they dash through the rocky terrain. He clarifies their true objective. They aren't just running, but are meant to cause as much chaos and destruction as possible on their way out. A sudden, violent crack echoes through the air, signaling the start of the diversion. He remains focused as the sounds of impact and destruction begin to erupt around them. Time is running out, and the urgency of their mission weighs heavily on him as he leads the charge. Meanwhile, Ban stands his ground against the massive, looming Hydra, his small frame dwarfed by the creature's scale. He calls out to Leaf one last time, entrusting the final stages of the plan to him before turning his full attention to the beast. The beast lunges with a deafening roar, its massive body slithering through the water and debris. It screams for them not to run, its predatory instincts fully ignited as it pursues its prey with terrifying speed. High above the chaos, the observer watches the unfolding battle with a calm, knowing expression. Suddenly, a massive pillar of light and energy erupts from the ground, shaking the very foundations of the area and illuminating the sky. The observer adjusts her glasses as she receives a final directive from Leaf. Her task is clear: monitor the Hydra's every move from her vantage point above the valley and report immediately if it attempts to break away from the designated area. Nearby, a figure in a witch's hat takes to the sky, grumbling about the lack of chivalry shown to her before leaving the remaining burden to her allies. She disappears into the distance, leaving the battlefield behind to those still on the ground. Down in the gorge, Ban stands his ground as a thunderous impact shakes the very earth, sending debris flying. He stares in shock as his equipment reacts to the sheer, overwhelming force of the beast's assault. He quickly recovers, darting through the rocky terrain with a calculated smirk. Every movement is deliberate, part of a larger scheme that seems to be unfolding exactly as he envisioned. With a sudden burst of motion, he hurls a simple piece of cloth toward the massive creature. From her high perch, the observer watches with skepticism, doubting that such a meager offering could possibly hinder a monster of that magnitude. The Hydra lunges, its massive head snapping at the air where he stood moments before. It sneers at his efforts, dismissing his maneuvers as useless attempts to delay the inevitable, while the observer begins to suspect he is merely playing for time. A blinding flash erupts within the narrow pass, momentarily obscuring the combatants in a haze of light and dust. The observer's mind races, trying to discern the true objective behind these seemingly desperate tactics. As the smoke clears, the towering serpent looms over the young healer, its voice dripping with a cold, predatory respect. It acknowledges his tenacity, but declares that his struggle has finally reached its conclusion. The creature's throat begins to pulse with a sickly, rhythmic glow, preparing to unleash a reward for his persistence. It is the most lethal toxin in its arsenal, a concentrated death that it promises will be his end. High above, the observer is gripped by a sudden, primal fear as she senses the shift in the air. This new venom is unlike anything she has witnessed before, a force of pure destruction that leaves her trembling in its wake. She watches in terror as the Hydra's ultimate attack streaks through the canyon, a lethal white arc aimed directly at her ally. Even with his legendary resilience, the sheer potency of this venom seems insurmountable. Desperate, she prays for a miracle while the witch races against time to intervene. The beast roars a final farewell as the massive torrent of toxic fluid erupts, completely engulfing the young warrior in a devastating splash. Her eyes widen in shock as the white sludge coats the jagged rock face where he once stood. The impact is absolute, leaving nothing but a dripping, caustic mess against the stone. Seeing the carnage, the monster erupts into a mocking laugh, its victory seemingly assured. Nearby, the witch can only stare in stunned silence, unable to believe the sudden end of their companion. It revels in the kill, convinced that the troublesome healer has finally been erased from existence. The creature's multiple heads hiss with sadistic glee as the venomous pool settles. However, as the mist clears, he stands tall and untouched, his expression one of calm defiance. He coolly informs the beast that such a weak concoction could never hope to affect him. He explains that the seemingly random scraps of cloth the creature tore through were actually sophisticated filters. The Hydra recoils in confusion, unable to comprehend how its most lethal weapon failed so utterly. Recalling his training, he describes how healers utilize natural polymers and quartz sand to create specialized barriers. These materials are designed to strip away any foreign contaminants from a liquid, rendering even the most complex toxins harmless. This deep understanding of chemical properties is essential for the constant development of new medicines. He emphasizes that a true healer must master every resource available to stay ahead of such threats. Because of this preparation, the most impure elements of the venom were filtered out the moment they made contact. He notes with a smirk that a creature relying on high-viscosity toxins is particularly vulnerable to such a simple, yet elegant, defense. He stands back, allowing the young medic to take center stage as the true nature of their defense is revealed. The boy explains with a confident smirk that the beast's oh-so-potent venom has lost its lethality, neutralized entirely by a clever filtration system. While the serpent recoils in shock, the girl with the spectacles can only watch in wide-eyed amazement at the sheer audacity of their counter-tactic. He watches as, before the creature can even process the insult, the very ground beneath it gives way with a deafening crack. The Hydra's indignant cry is cut short as the earth shatters, sending the massive reptilian form tumbling into a dark, yawning abyss that had been prepared right under its many feet. It crashes into the depths, and from above, the pompadoured warrior looks down into the newly formed prison with a satisfied grin. He remarks that the pit is the perfect cage for such a liquid bastard, expressing a sense of pride in the makeshift home they've constructed for their foe. He stands triumphantly alongside his allies at the edge of the crater, their collective relief palpable. They celebrate the success of their coordinated effort, acknowledging that their intricate plan has worked out perfectly, leaving the once terrifying Hydra neutralized and the path forward clear. Ban beams with pride, holding up a small glass jar as he declares the incident officially resolved. He explains that after the Hydra was captured, its venom was filtered multiple times, a process that caused the massive beast to shrink down to this manageable size. He peers into the glass, finding it incredibly convenient that such a terrifying threat could be reduced to something so small and portable. Leaf snatches the jar, his expression souring as he glares at the miniature monster. He hasn't forgotten the chaos it caused, calling it a bastard for the trouble it brought upon them. He begins to shake the container with the practiced vigor of a former bartender, demanding the creature repent for its sins while Ban watches with a mix of confusion and concern. The group begins their trek back, deciding to take their captive to the Shooting Star Atelier. They hope that by looking into the creature, they might uncover the reason why it went violent in the first place. As they walk, the observer notes that the creature might hold the key to understanding the mysterious miasma that has been spreading across the land. Their arrival at the camp is met with jubilant cries from the gathered people. The word spreads quickly through the tents. The heroes have returned victorious. Amidst the relief, the heavy cost of the battle is acknowledged. The Hydra was a far more formidable foe than anyone had anticipated, leaving many wounded in its wake. Standing before the gathered survivors, the warrior speaks with a booming voice, honoring those who risked everything to keep the royal capital safe from the reptilian threat. He raises a hand to the cheering crowd, calling for a grand banquet to celebrate their survival and the hard-won peace. He and his companions are surrounded by the boisterous cheers of the camp as the night air fills with praise for the Twilight Dragon's exploits. Standing before the crackling fire, the leader of the group calls for silence, insisting that the credit for their success belongs to another. He gestures toward the young chemist, declaring that without his intervention, the Hydra would have laid waste to the royal capital. He goes on to introduce the boy to the cheering masses as the Leaf Chemist, the true hero of the day. As the crowd erupts into a rhythmic chant of his name, the young man in the white coat stands frozen, overwhelmed by the sudden outpouring of admiration. Seeking a moment of peace, he retreats to the shadows behind the tents, away from the overwhelming noise of the celebration. His solitude is soon interrupted by the leader, who approaches with a warm smile to check on him. The young chemist admits his exhaustion and lack of familiarity with such attention, though he remains humble, insisting the victory was a collective effort. Sitting beside him, the older warrior reflects on their own lack of experience and confesses how much they relied on the chemist's composure and tactical brilliance during the heat of battle. With a look of genuine respect, he extends a formal invitation, suggesting that their team could reach unprecedented heights if the chemist were to join them permanently as a member of the Twilight Dragon. The offer leaves the young man momentarily speechless, his eyes widening as he processes the weight of the leader's sincere request. Looking out over the glowing camp together, he finally finds his voice, expressing a deep sense of gratitude and joy at being so highly valued by his comrades. He beams with a newfound resolve, his eyes sparkling as he admits to having discovered a new ambition. The leader of Twilight Dragon watches in stunned silence as the young chemist explains that while the offer is tempting, he has a different path in mind. His hand tightens around the strap of his bag, a physical manifestation of his internal conviction. He acknowledges his current standing as a mere F-rank adventurer, realizing that joining such a prestigious group now would feel like unearned success rather than a personal achievement. Turning his back to gaze out at the horizon, he declares his intention to climb the ranks through his own merit. The weight of his decision hangs in the air, marking a turning point in his journey from a simple medic to a true adventurer. Under the glow of the full moon on the balcony, he elaborates on his vision, explaining that his goal is to eventually stand as an equal. He dreams of a day when they can fight side by side, forming a party that surpasses all others in strength and unity. With a sharp exhale, he clenches his fist, his expression hardening with determination. This is no longer just a passing thought. It is his ultimate dream, a promise made to himself and the man standing before him. The leader responds not with disappointment, but with a wide, challenging grin, extending his own fist in a gesture of mutual respect. He accepts the challenge, declaring that from this moment forward, they are officially rivals. They share a quiet moment of understanding, the air between them thick with a new kind of camaraderie. The veteran warrior warns his younger counterpart that he has no intention of making the path to the top easy. Their knuckles meet in a firm fist bump, sealing the pact between them. He echoes the sentiment with a confident smile, ready to face whatever trials lie ahead on his quest for S-rank status. The following day, the sun shines brightly over the bustling town, illuminating the sturdy wooden structure of the local tavern. Life continues at steady pace as the echoes of the previous night's resolution begin to take shape in the light of a new morning. Inside the warm interior, the observer adjusts her glasses while examining a peculiar sample of miasma, her brow furrowed in concentration. Nearby, he has traded his adventurer's gear for an apron, diligently serving hot meals to the patrons while the group's youngest member assists in the background. She stares intently at the glass jar, her brow furrowed in concentration. Despite her specialized Mercury's eye ability, the writhing specimen within remains a complete mystery. When her companion asks for an update, she can only offer a frustrated sigh, admitting that she has hit a dead end in her investigation. Continuing her analysis over a meal, she notes that every appraisal method she knows has failed to yield results. The nature of the so-called miasma eludes her, though the dark energy radiating from the sample leads her to suspect a direct connection to the work of a demon. She taps a finger against the glass, the rhythmic sound echoing her growing unease. The tactical choice of using a Hydra for an assault on the royal capital seems nonsensical, leaving her to wonder about the true objective behind such a brazen move. Turning her gaze toward the window, she feels a chilling certainty that a larger plot is unfolding in the shadows, far beyond their current understanding. The silence of the room is heavy with the weight of things left unsaid as her companions watch her with concern. She recoils as the specimen inside the jar suddenly lunges forward, its tiny mouth unhinging to emit a piercing, desperate plea for help. Before she can react, the glass shatters with a violent explosion, sending shards flying across the room. The young medic rushes to her side as the smoke clears, his voice filled with worry as he checks for injuries. She coughs through the dust, struggling to regain her composure while the chaos of the destroyed laboratory surrounds them. He stares in disbelief at the floor, where amidst the jagged remains of the container, there is nothing left but empty space. The Hydra sample has vanished entirely, leaving no trace of its presence or the strange magic that had just been unleashed. Above the city, the afternoon sun struggles to pierce through a thick layer of clouds. The streets below remain oblivious to the strange occurrence that just took place within the walls of the research facility. A lone hawk glides through the turbulent air, its keen eyes scanning the horizon with predatory focus. It seems to be searching for something specific, its flight path steady despite the shifting winds. The bird's eye view shifts to a hooded figure biting down on a lollipop with a sharp crack. They mutter to themselves, acknowledging the disappearance of the Hydra sample with a chillingly calm demeanor that suggests they were the ones pulling the strings all along. He peers into the swirling depths of a crystal ball, a wide, toothy grin spreading across his face as he crunches on a lollipop. The sight of the group that managed to fell a miasma-soaked Hydra clearly amuses him, and he notes with a dark chuckle that they have found some truly interesting individuals. His amusement turns to a sharp realization as he recognizes one of the figures in the orb, gasping as he wonders if this is the same man who saved Diane. The thought sends him into a fit of manic laughter, his hand slapping the ground in delight as he expresses a twisted desire to sit down and have a conversation with such a capable pack of humans. Turning his attention to his companion, he seeks confirmation for his excitement, asking if the scene isn't just perfect. He dismissively reasons that a low-ranking demon like the Hydra never stood a chance against such opponents anyway, his tone dripping with casual arrogance. Behind him, a silent figure with messy, light-colored hair begins to walk away, his dark cloak billowing slightly. Despite the boisterous calls to not ignore the conversation, the youth continues his departure without a word, his focus clearly elsewhere. He stops, his expression hardening into a mask of cold, focused hatred as he mutters a curse against the repugnant healer. A dark mark streaks down from his left eye, emphasizing the intensity of his gaze. Leaving the glowing crystal ball behind, he strides into the shadows, his mind consumed by a singular, vengeful purpose. He whispers a warning to the one he calls the Leaf Chemist, declaring that their eventual end will come by no one's hand but his own. His knuckles whiten as he grips the fabric of his cloak in a tight, trembling fist. The vow is sealed in his mind. The journey of his enemies will conclude in ruin, and he will be the one to deliver the final blow. The atmosphere in the capital is thick with unease as rumors of a string of abductions spread through the local cafes. Patrons whisper of more than 5 victims in the last month alone, noting with growing dread that the targets are exclusively young women. She listens intently to the grim reports, her expression darkening as she hears that the royal capital is no longer the safe haven it once was. The lack of any trace of the victims, save for ominous bloodstains, paints a chilling picture of the unseen threat. He watches her with concern, sensing her unease, and tentatively speaks her name to draw her back to the present. He reminds her that they, too, must remain on high alert given the escalating danger surrounding them. She, however, is far from vigilant, instead choosing to drown her frustrations in a massive mug of ale despite the early hour. When he tries to intervene, she snaps back, her voice thick with grief as she laments the destruction of her atelier and her lack of any other recourse. The woman lets out a sharp, drunken roar, demanding silence as she slams her hand down, nearly knocking the boy back with the sheer force of her outburst. He sighs, observing the diverse crowd around them while she continues her tirade, frustrated that the demon's involvement remains a mystery and that she failed to analyze the miasma before her workshop was lost. He tries to reason with her, suggesting that intoxication won't solve the mysteries they face. As they walk through the bustling streets, the boy realizes how different the capital is from the isolated dead end, or their quiet village. He remarks on the incredible diversity of the people passing by, noting the sheer variety of races that call the city home. The world is far more vast than he imagined, populated by a myriad of beings ranging from aquatic fishfolk to avian bird people. Even within the city walls, beastkin and dragon descendants walk alongside humans, though some races remain so elusive they are considered little more than myths. She confirms his observation, her tone turning more academic as she prepares to mention one of these rare groups. He reacts with wide-eyed surprise, his curiosity piqued by the mention of beings so rare they are rarely documented. Before them stands a striking figure with massive, iridescent butterfly wings sprouting from their back, a living testament to the insect people she just described. The boy can only stare in shock at the magnificent, alien beauty of a race he never knew existed. They watch as the elusive figure vanishes into the crowd, the conversation at the cafe continuing until a sudden, violent commotion erupts nearby. Ms. Mercury notes that staying in the capital long enough inevitably leads to such encounters, though she expresses a quiet desire to meet someone truly remarkable. Nearby, a group of aggressive men surrounds a trembling youth, berating him as a talentless loser and demanding he stop wasting their time. Ms. Mercury watches the cruelty unfold, her expression unreadable as she muses on the lack of empathy in others, wishing they could see the world through her eyes. The young man, Brahms, is drenched in sweat, stammering apologies for his perceived uselessness while his tormentors roar with laughter. They mock his pathetic state, threatening to kick him out of their party immediately because his worthlessness is beyond description. Seeing the injustice, Leaf tenses, ready to spring into action, but Ms. Mercury quickly warns him against getting involved in such a mess. However, the air suddenly shifts as one of the thugs shouts a final, degrading insult at the cowering boy. He is gone in a flash, appearing before the bullies before anyone can blink. Ban stands tall, his voice cold and commanding as he demands they apologize to the boy they were just mocking. The thugs, caught off guard by the sudden intrusion, sneer and ask if he's looking for a fight. Brahms, still terrified, pleads with his new defender to stay out of it, but Ban's focus remains on the bullies, questioning how they could treat a fellow party member with such disdain. He repeats his demand for an apology, his presence becoming an immovable wall against their aggression. As the thugs prepare to strike, Ban lets out a weary sigh, deciding it is time to demonstrate the true hierarchy of power. Before a single punch can land, the lead aggressor's eyes roll back, and a deep, unnatural slumber takes hold of him instantly. In the blink of an eye, the entire group of thugs lies sprawled across the cobblestones, silenced by a sudden, overwhelming drowsiness. Brahms stands amidst the fallen men, his jaw dropped in utter disbelief at the silent resolution of the conflict. The healer simply turns away, a small, calm smile on his face as he tells the bewildered boy that the men are merely sleeping for a while. He urges them to move on, leaving the unconscious bullies behind in the middle of the street. He gestures toward a lavish spread of food, encouraging the young man to eat his fill and regain his strength. Observing the boy's rough skin and hollow cheeks, he dismisses any concerns about the cost, insisting that the meal is on him and that the guest should eat as much as he likes. He continues his clinical assessment, noting that the boy's pale complexion is a clear sign of severe malnourishment and promises to provide specialized stomach medicine once the meal is finished. Instead of gratitude, the boy is suddenly enveloped in a thick shroud of despair, muttering a wish for death that leaves his benefactor utterly bewildered by the sudden shift in mood. The youth sinks further into self-loathing, whispering that a person as worthless as himself has no right to receive such kindness from a good-hearted stranger. Stunned by this overwhelming negativity, the healer watches as the boy compares his own existence to drifting seaweed or even waste, claiming he has no reason to be alive and would be more useful as a toilet. In a sudden moment of clarity, the boy reveals the source of his perceived shame. He is a vampire, a member of a race known for its pride and isolation, though he appears far from the fearsome creatures of legend. He clarifies that he carries mixed blood, which explains how he can withstand the sunlight that would normally be lethal to his kind, making him a special case even among his own people. Having grown up in a secluded vampire village, his presence in the capital is a rare anomaly that piques the interest of the group's observer, who finds the situation quite unusual. He recounts the daily abuse he suffered from his own people, who were obsessed with bloodline purity, until he finally found the courage to flee to the royal capital to escape their cruelty. He looks down, his voice heavy with a sense of isolation as he confesses that even here, he feels he has no place to belong. Continuing his self-deprecation, the young man insists he is worthless and that his existence benefits no one, recalling the harsh treatment he received from others as justification for his low self-esteem. He turns his gaze toward his companion, warning him that getting involved will only lead to suffering the same miserable fate. In a sudden shift of tone, the healer catches him completely off guard by earnestly asking to be his friend, leaving the boy stunned and speechless. He explains that he can see the inherent kindness in his new acquaintance, noting that the reason the boy doesn't speak ill of those who mistreated him is because he prioritizes the feelings of others over his own pain. With a warm smile, the medic reiterates his respect and desire for friendship regardless of where the boy comes from, causing a flicker of hope to appear in the youth's eyes. Overwhelmed by the first kind words he has ever heard, the boy leans forward with tears of joy, shouting his enthusiastic acceptance of the offer. The two share a moment of genuine laughter and connection, while their companion watches the scene with a mix of amusement and quiet observation. As the emotional weight of the new bond settles, the woman in glasses shifts the conversation to a darker topic, mentioning a troubling series of recent abductions while the young man beside her is still moved to tears by the kindness he's been shown. Under the pale light of the moon, the city streets hold a hidden danger, as reports indicate that only young women are being targeted and not a single victim has been found yet. The observer adjusted her glasses, her gaze fixed on a dark, ominous mark on the floor. It was unmistakable, a fresh bloodstain, a silent testament to the violence that had recently transpired in the shadows of the city. Nearby, heavy footsteps pounded against the pavement in a desperate rhythm. Each breath was a ragged gasp as the runner pushed their body to the limit, fleeing from an unseen pursuer through the narrow streets. She eventually found herself trapped in a dead-end alley, her back against the cold brick wall. Trembling with terror, she pleaded for mercy, her voice cracking as she begged the approaching shadow to stay away and stop its advance. But her cries for help went unanswered in the desolate night. In response, the hooded figure only offered a chilling, predatory grin. The darkness of the hood obscured their eyes, leaving only that cruel, silent smile to greet the girl's desperate cries as they closed the distance. Under the cold, indifferent light of the full moon, a final, piercing scream tore through the night air, suddenly cut short as the darkness claimed another victim. The bustling guild hall is filled with the low hum of constant chatter as adventurers gather around the central request board. It is a chaotic tapestry of parchment and ink, where every notice represents a plea for help or a promise of coin to those brave enough to answer. Standing before the crowded display, the sorceress known as Ms. Mercury gestures toward the various postings, explaining to her young companion that this is where the guild's available tasks are centralized for all to see. She identifies it simply as the request board, the lifeblood of their profession. Hearing this, he immediately offers his assistance, his eyes bright with a desire to be useful. She hesitates, however, noting that while his enthusiasm is appreciated, the current tasks might prove too taxing for their leader, Leaf, to handle at the moment. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of their companion, who rushes toward them while panting and wiping sweat from his brow. He offers a hurried apology for his tardiness, prompting the sorceress to question if their objective is indeed the recent string of mysterious abduction incidents. The young man sinks into a state of profound gloom, his head bowed as he laments his own perceived inadequacies and apologizes for making his friends wait. He seems utterly defeated by his own lack of punctuality, while the others watch his dramatic display of self-pity with a mix of concern and exasperation. Amidst the clutter of the board, a specific notice catches the eye, a search request for a 20-year-old woman named Yumel Patriel. The report is grim, detailing a bloodstain found in a dark alleyway near a local bar, along with abandoned personal belongings that have already drawn the attention of the Royal Capital's Vigilante Corps. Later, as the trio gathers around a table to discuss their next move, the sorceress reveals her personal stake in the mission, explaining that the reward money will be used to rebuild her destroyed atelier. She provides further context on the victim, noting that Yumel has been missing for an entire week since she was last seen leaving her place of work. Driven by the prospect of a juicy reward, she strikes a confident pose, her eyes gleaming with ambition as she declares her intent to gather information on foot. While she radiates energy and determination, her companions remain skeptical, their faces etched with doubt about the feasibility of her impulsive plan. Without waiting for a consensus, she charges forward with a boisterous shout, leaving the two boys startled in her wake. She dismisses their hesitation, barking at them to keep up and not just stand around like fools while there is work to be done. They are left standing in the middle of the hall, watching her retreating figure with a sense of shared exhaustion. As she calls back to them, labeling them both as useless, they can only exchange a weary look, realizing that the investigation has begun whether they are ready or not. He follows closely as the group approaches a room, listening as the woman in glasses explains they have found a vital witness to the recent abductions. Inside the room, they find the young woman who escaped. The investigator asks if she can describe her attacker, but the survivor can only recall being ambushed on her way home, her memory a blur of fear. She trembles, her hands gripping the bedsheets as the questioning continues. When asked how she managed to flee while others vanished, she can only repeat that the darkness and terror overwhelmed her, leaving her with few clear memories to share. In her mind, a memory of a cold, empty alleyway flickers, where a sudden, mysterious light had appeared to guide her path to safety. Hearing this, the investigator sighs with relief, acknowledging the sheer luck of her survival while noting that the authorities suspect a lone culprit is behind the string of disappearances. The survivor then reveals a startling truth. She believes her survival was no accident, but rather the protection of her ancestors, as she carries the rare lineage of beast blood within her veins. This revelation causes the investigator to freeze, her eyes widening behind her spectacles as a piece of the puzzle finally clicks into place. She quickly consults the official records, confirming a grim pattern. Every other victim of the abductions possessed nothing but pure human blood. The young healer watches her, his mind racing as he realizes the selection of targets isn't random. The perpetrator is specifically hunting human females, and the survivor's non-human blood is likely what saved her life. He watches as the investigator's attention fixes on the bandages wrapped around the girl's arm. Despite the survivor's insistence that it is merely a shallow wound from the struggle, the woman in glasses senses something more significant and refuses to let the matter drop. She watches as the young healer takes charge, his medical training overriding the awkwardness of the situation. He insists on examining the girl's injury, warning that even minor wounds can turn fatal if neglected, while the patient looks on with a mix of confusion and trepidation. As he carefully unwinds the bandages, he identifies signs of a burgeoning infection. Behind her spectacles, her eyes narrow with concern as he explains the necessity of draining the pus and disinfecting the area to prevent further complications. He works with practiced precision, his focus entirely on the task at hand while the patient remains still under his care. Once the treatment is complete, the girl drifts into a deep, restorative sleep, leaving the room quiet save for the soft sounds of her breathing. Later that night, she summons the chemist to a secluded alleyway. He arrives with a questioning look, wondering why he was called out at such an hour, his silhouette sharp against the moonlit street. She doesn't mince words, demanding the absolute truth from him. He remains guarded, acknowledging that she has every right to be angry if his suspicions prove correct, though he maintains a calm exterior. With a piercing gaze that demands honesty, she asks him directly what he was doing the previous night. The question catches him off guard, a bead of sweat forming on his brow as the weight of her scrutiny settles over him. He remains silent for a long moment, the tension between them thick enough to feel as they stand alone in the narrow passage. She lays out her evidence, noting that the victim's wound bore the unmistakable marks of a vampire's fangs. Knowing his particular taste for human blood, she posits that he might be the one responsible for the recent string of attacks, challenging him to deny it if she is wrong. This accusation strikes a nerve, causing him to recoil in bitter frustration. He laments that he is always the first to be blamed, his expression hardening as he prepares to defend his honor against the suspicion that follows him. A sudden outburst of self-loathing shatters the tense silence as the young man declares himself a worthless monster. The weight of the recent accusation seems to have finally broken his composure, leaving him trembling in a dimly lit street. Desperate to end the confrontation, he insists he has had enough, his words stumbling over a desire to trust despite the mounting evidence. Ms. Mercury quickly interjects, her tone firm yet surprisingly defensive as she clarifies that she isn't casting blame, pleading for him to simply listen. Before another word can be exchanged, a shadow looms over him, and a pair of slender arms wrap around his neck from behind. A woman with a predatory grace and unmistakable fangs whispers into his ear, calling him her foolish little brother. The sudden appearance of this true monster leaves him paralyzed with shock as she mocks his unchanging nature.